I am Camille, 35 years old, and I spent my entire adult life letting my family believe I was just a low-ranking desk clerk. Last Sunday at my parents' sprawling Atlanta estate, my sister's wealthy white husband hurled a pair of heavy mixed martial arts training gloves directly at my chest. "I will snap your arm and put you in a hospital bed to teach you your place," he sneered, towering over me, while my terrified 7-year-old daughter hid behind my legs. I expected a weak, defenseless mother who would cower and apologize. He had no idea he had just cornered an active-duty special operations major. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated what you are capable of. The sprawling Atlanta estate was a monument to superficial success. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined the massive stone patio, and a pristine infinity pool sparkled under the harsh afternoon sun. Yet beneath this flawless exterior lay a deeply toxic reality. My family traded authenticity for luxury long ago, measuring human worth entirely by bank account balances and social connections. I had always been the glaring anomaly in their carefully curated world. I chose service over status. I chose quiet duty over loud boasting, and for that choice I was treated as a permanent burden. When Trent threw the gloves, it was not a playful invitation. It was a calculated assault on my dignity. He knew I had just returned from a long rotation. He knew I was exhausted. He saw a perfect opportunity to establish physical dominance in front of his in-laws, asserting his position as the unquestioned patriarch of the property. The heavy leather gloves struck my collarbone and dropped heavily onto the manicured patio stone. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly at my sides, instinctively shielding Layla behind my calves. The sweltering Georgia heat pressed down on us, but my blood ran ice cold. Trent stepped directly into my personal space, cracking his knuckles with deliberate, aggressive slowness. He was a tall, imposing man who used his physical size and massive bank account to bully everyone around him into absolute submission. My younger sister Jasmine sat lounging on the luxury patio sofa, scrolling lazily through her phone. She did not even bother to glance up as her husband actively threatened the mother of her niece. My mother Vivica adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and let out a long, exasperated sigh. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive mimosa. "Camille, stop provoking him," she scolded, her tone dripping with the familiar disdain I had endured for decades. "You know Trent takes his combat training very seriously. Why must you always ruin our beautiful Sunday brunches with your stubborn attitude? Just put the gloves on and let him show you the technique." I kept my eyes locked securely on Trent, mapping his stance, his center of gravity, the obvious openings in his amateur posture. "I am not putting on the gloves, Mom," I replied, my voice steady. "He just threatened to break my arm in front of Layla." My father Desmond chuckled loudly from his position by the massive outdoor grill. He casually flipped a steak and shook his head in amusement. "Do not be so dramatic, Camille," he said. "Trent just has that alpha energy. It is exactly what makes him a top-tier venture capitalist. He is a natural provider. You could learn a thing or two about discipline and success from him instead of rotting away at whatever low-level clerical desk job you do for the military. It is a complete embarrassment how you carry yourself. Look at you. No wealthy husband, no ambition, just a brutish attitude." Every single word out of their mouths was systematically designed to elevate Trent and diminish me. To my parents, Trent was the ultimate white savior. He financed Jasmine's high-end fashion boutique, paid for my parents' exclusive country club memberships, and tossed large sums of money around to guarantee their absolute loyalty. They worshipped his wealth with a sickening devotion. To them, my military career was a shameful, unladylike failure. Because I never disclosed my rank or my actual duties, they assumed I pushed papers in a dusty back office simply because I lacked the grace and charm to secure a wealthy provider like Jasmine did. They had absolutely no concept of the reality of my life. They did not know about the covert deployments, the highly tactical command units, the classified operations I led across the globe. To them, I was just Camille, the family disappointment who could not afford designer clothes and relied on their charity. Trent fed greedily on their vocal approval. His arrogant smirk widened as he saw my parents actively backing him up against their own daughter. He stepped even closer, his breathing heavy, his face red with unearned confidence. You hear that Camille Trent sneered, his voice dropping to a menacing pitch. Even your own father knows you are an absolute joke. You walk around here with that stiff military posture like you are someone important. You are a glorified secretary living in your parents' guest house because you cannot survive on your own. Pick up the gloves. I am going to teach you what real combat looks like. Mommy, please, Layla whispered. Her small, trembling hands gripped the denim fabric of my jeans tightly. I could feel her shaking against my legs. The pure, primal instinct to protect my child surged through my veins, demanding immediate, violent action. But years of elite psychological conditioning and tactical discipline kept my heart rate perfectly steady and my breathing measured. I did not break eye contact. Back up, Trent, I said, my voice low, flat, and completely devoid of fear. This is your only warning. Step away from me and my daughter right now. Vivica slammed her crystal glass down onto the glass patio table, the sharp noise cutting through the humid air. Camille, she snapped. How dare you speak to him that way in our home? Trent pays the mortgage on that guest house you are living in. You owe him your utmost respect. Apologize to him right now before he decides to evict you. You cannot afford rent anywhere else in Atlanta on your pathetic government salary. Jasmine finally looked up from her glowing screen, rolling her eyes in deep annoyance. Seriously, Camille, you are acting so ungrateful. Trent buys your groceries and you treat him like he is an enemy. Just take the takedown. Let him throw you on the grass. I want to record it. It will be hilarious for my social media followers. They viewed my potential physical humiliation as mere entertainment. They viewed Trent's unprovoked aggression as a display of superior social status that I should quietly submit to. Trent rolled his broad shoulders, stretching his neck from side to side like a professional fighter entering an octagon. He craved an audience. He wanted to break me physically because he knew he could never break me mentally. He wanted to prove his absolute dominance over the black sheep of the family. You are not giving the orders here, sweetheart, Trent hissed, his eyes darkening with genuine malice. I am the man of this massive estate. I am the provider. You are just a charity case taking up space on my property. Now I am going to put you in the dirt exactly where you belong, and little Layla is going to watch her mommy cry. He did not wait for me to respond. He planted his back foot, dropped his heavy shoulder, and lunged forward with explosive speed. He threw his entire body weight into a violent, aggressive takedown, aimed directly at my center of mass, fully intending to drive me hard into the solid stone pavers and shatter my bones. I will snap your arm and put you in a hospital bed to teach you your place. Those were the exact words my arrogant white brother-in-law sneered at me as he hurled heavy mixed martial arts training gloves directly at my chest. He did it right in front of my terrified 7-year-old daughter, expecting a weak and defenseless mother who would simply cower and take the humiliation. He thought his money bought him the right to break me. He had absolutely no idea that his little display of dominance had just cornered an active-duty special operations major. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who completely underestimated what you are capable of. The sprawling Atlanta estate was a monument to superficial success. Perfectly trimmed hedges, the massive stone patio, and a pristine infinity pool sparkled under the harsh afternoon sun. Yet beneath this flawless exterior lay a deeply toxic reality. My family traded authenticity for luxury long ago, measuring human worth entirely by bank account balances and social connections. As an African-American family that had climbed the social ladder, my parents were obsessed with maintaining their elite country club image. I had always been the glaring anomaly in their carefully curated world. I chose military service over chasing corporate status. I chose quiet duty over loud boasting, and for that choice I was treated as a permanent burden. When Trent threw the gloves, it was not a playful invitation. It was a calculated assault on my dignity. He knew I had just returned from a long rotation. He knew I was exhausted. He saw a perfect opportunity to establish physical dominance in front of his in-laws, asserting his position as the unquestioned patriarch of the property. The heavy leather gloves struck my collarbone and dropped heavily onto the manicured stone pavers. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly at my sides, instinctively shielding Layla behind my calves. The sweltering Georgia heat pressed down on us, but my blood ran ice cold. Trent stepped directly into my personal space, cracking his knuckles with deliberate, aggressive slowness. He was a tall, imposing man who used his physical size and massive bank account to bully everyone around him into absolute submission. My younger sister Jasmine sat lounging on the luxury patio sofa, scrolling lazily through her phone. She did not even bother to glance up as her husband actively threatened the mother of her niece. My mother Vivica adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and let out a long, exasperated sigh. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive mimosa. "Camille, stop provoking him," she scolded, her tone dripping with the familiar disdain I had endured for decades. "You know Trent takes his combat training very seriously. Why must you always ruin our beautiful Sunday brunches with your stubborn attitude? Just put the gloves on and let him show you the technique." I kept my eyes locked securely on Trent, mapping his stance, his center of gravity, the obvious openings in his amateur posture. "I am not putting on the gloves, Mom," I replied, my voice steady. "He just threatened to break my arm in front of Layla." My father Desmond chuckled loudly from his position by the massive outdoor grill. He casually flipped a steak and shook his head in amusement. "Do not be so dramatic, Camille," he said. "Trent just has that alpha energy. It is exactly what makes him a top-tier venture capitalist. He is a natural provider. You could learn a thing or two about discipline and success from him instead of rotting away at whatever low-level clerical desk job you do for the military. It is a complete embarrassment how you carry yourself. Look at you. No wealthy husband, no ambition, just a brutish attitude." Every single word out of their mouths was systematically designed to elevate Trent and diminish me. To my parents, Trent was the ultimate white savior. He financed Jasmine's high-end fashion boutique, paid for my parents' exclusive country club memberships, and tossed large sums of money around to guarantee their absolute loyalty. They worshipped his wealth with a sickening devotion. To them, my military career was a shameful, unladylike failure. Because I never disclosed my rank or my actual duties, they assumed I pushed papers in a dusty back office simply because I lacked the grace and charm to secure a wealthy provider like Jasmine did. They had absolutely no concept of the reality of my life. They did not know about the covert deployments, the highly tactical command units, the classified operations I led across the globe. To them, I was just Camille, the family disappointment who could not afford designer clothes and relied on their charity. Trent fed greedily on their vocal approval. His arrogant smirk widened as he saw my parents actively backing him up against their own daughter. He stepped even closer, his breathing heavy, his face red with unearned confidence. "You hear that?" Camille Trent sneered, his voice dropping to a menacing pitch. "Even your own father knows you are an absolute joke. You walk around here with that stiff military posture like you are someone important. You are a glorified secretary living in your parents' guest house because you cannot survive on your own. Pick up the gloves. I am going to teach you what real combat looks like." "Mommy, please," Layla whispered. Her small, trembling hands gripped the denim fabric of my jeans tightly. I could feel her shaking against my legs. The pure, primal instinct to protect my child surged through my veins, demanding immediate, violent action. But years of elite psychological conditioning and tactical discipline kept my heart rate perfectly steady and my breathing measured. I did not break eye contact. "Back up, Trent," I said, my voice low, flat, and completely devoid of fear. "This is your only warning. Step away from me and my daughter right now." Vivica slammed her crystal glass down onto the glass patio table, the sharp noise cutting through the humid air. "Camille," she snapped, "how dare you speak to him that way in our home? Trent pays the mortgage on that guest house you are living in. You owe him your utmost respect. Apologize to him right now before he decides to evict you. You cannot afford rent anywhere else in Atlanta on your pathetic government salary." Jasmine finally looked up from her glowing screen, rolling her eyes in deep annoyance. "Seriously, Camille, you are acting so ungrateful. Trent buys your groceries and you treat him like he is an enemy. Just take the takedown. Let him throw you on the grass. I want to record it. It will be hilarious for my social media followers." They viewed my potential physical humiliation as mere entertainment. They viewed Trent's unprovoked aggression as a display of superior social status that I should quietly submit to. Trent rolled his broad shoulders, stretching his neck from side to side like a professional fighter entering an octagon. He craved an audience. He wanted to break me physically because he knew he could never break me mentally. He wanted to prove his absolute dominance over the black sheep of the family. "You are not giving the orders here, sweetheart," Trent hissed, his eyes darkening with genuine malice. "I am the man of this massive estate. I am the provider. You are just a charity case taking up space on my property. Now I am going to put you in the dirt exactly where you belong, and little Layla is going to watch her mommy cry." He did not wait for me to respond. He planted his back foot, dropped his heavy shoulder, and lunged forward with explosive speed. He threw his entire body weight into a violent, aggressive takedown aimed directly at my center of mass, fully intending to drive me hard into the solid stone pavers and shatter my bones. He expected me to scream. He expected me to scramble backward in blind panic. He expected a terrified civilian. I did not flinch. As his thick hands reached for my shoulders, my combat veteran muscle memory took over with devastating efficiency. In less than 3 seconds, I executed a classified close-quarters combat maneuver. I did not meet his force with opposing force. Instead, I stepped slightly off the center line, entirely redirecting his forward momentum. As he stumbled past me, I secured a vice-like grip on his right wrist. I twisted my hips, locking his arm into a precise hyperextension. I applied pressure right to the absolute brink of agonizing pain, stopping just millimeters before the bone would snap. Using his own heavy body weight against him, I drove him face first into the manicured lawn. The impact was a dull, heavy thud that knocked the wind completely out of his lungs. I pinned his shoulder to the grass with my knee, keeping his wrist locked in a position that left him completely paralyzed and completely humiliated. I did not break a sweat. I did not even raise my voice. "Stay down," I commanded, my tone as casual as if I were ordering a cup of coffee. The silence that fell over the patio was absolute and deafening. The only sound was Trent gasping for air, his face smashed against the expensive landscaping, his previous arrogance entirely evaporated into whimpering pain. My father dropped his grilling tongs. They clattered loudly against the stone. My mother sat frozen, her mouth open in pure shock. Then the illusion shattered. Trent let out a high-pitched scream of agony, thrashing helplessly against the grass. Jasmine leaped off the luxury sofa, her designer sandals slipping on the patio stone. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her eyes wide with hysterical rage. "What did you do to him? What did you do to my husband?" She pulled out her phone with frantic, desperate movements. She bypassed her camera app and immediately dialed 911. Her voice was shrill and panicked as the dispatcher answered. "Help! I need police right now. My sister has gone completely crazy. She just brutally assaulted my husband. She is a violent, unhinged woman, and she is a danger to a little girl. Send officers immediately." Jasmine glared at me, a victorious, cruel smirk, slowly replacing her panic. "You are going to jail, El Camille," she spat. "You are going to lose your daughter, and you are going to lose everything." I kept my knee firmly planted on Trent's shoulder, feeling Layla's small hands still gripping my jeans securely from behind. In the distance, the faint, piercing wail of police sirens began to cut through the quiet suburban air, growing louder with every passing second. I was suddenly facing imminent arrest, my own family weaponizing the law against me, entirely unaware of the storm they had just unleashed. The piercing wail of police sirens cut through the heavy Georgia humidity, growing louder and more frantic with every passing second. The flashing red and blue lights reflected wildly against the tall iron gates of my parents' estate, before two heavy patrol cruisers tore down the long circular driveway. The tires screeched to a halt on the pristine cobblestone. I slowly released my knee from Trent's shoulder and took 2 deliberate steps back, creating a safe physical barrier between his thrashing body and my daughter. I knelt down for a brief second, looking directly into Layla's wide, terrified brown eyes. I kept my voice incredibly soft and perfectly steady. I told her that Mommy had everything under control, that she was completely safe, and that she just needed to stay right behind me. 4 officers stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting cautiously on their heavy-duty belts. They were immediately greeted by the sheer, overwhelming opulence of the property. The pristine classical architecture, the expensive luxury vehicles parked near the fountain, and the overall country club aesthetic instantly dictated the power dynamic of the situation. To these officers, they were entering the domain of important, wealthy, upstanding citizens. And in that domain, I was clearly the immediate threat. I was wearing simple dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt. I did not fit the wealthy aesthetic of the estate, and my family was about to weaponize that exact perception against me. Trent scrambled to his feet the second the officers approached the patio. He clutched his right wrist aggressively against his chest, his face contorted into a mask of pure manufactured agony. He leaned heavily against one of the stone pillars, breathing in ragged, dramatic gasps. "Officers, thank God you are here!" He cried out, his voice trembling with a perfectly rehearsed vulnerability that made my stomach turn. He pointed his uninjured hand directly at me, his eyes wide with fake terror. That woman just attacked me completely unprovoked. I was just trying to invite her to join our family lunch, and she snapped. She grabbed me, twisted my arm, and threw me violently onto the stone floor. I think she broke my wrist. I want to press charges for felony assault immediately. The betrayal from my own flesh and blood unfolded with sickening speed and absolute precision. My mother, Vivica, rushed forward, smoothing down her designer silk blouse, seamlessly adopting the persona of a traumatized society matron. "Officer, my son-in-law is telling the absolute truth," she cried, gesturing frantically toward Trent with trembling hands. We were having a peaceful Sunday afternoon. Trent is a highly respected venture capitalist. He is a good man who provides everything for this family. He was just trying to be kind to Camille. She has always been incredibly aggressive and deeply jealous of his financial success. She just lashed out of nowhere. We are all absolutely terrified of her. She has a history of this kind of violent behavior. My father, Desmond, stepped up right beside her, shaking his head with an expression of deep paternal disappointment. He looked at the lead officer man to man, reinforcing the lie with his deep authoritative voice. "I hate to say this about my own daughter," Desmond said, his tone heavy with fake sorrow, "but she has been a massive failure her entire life. She works some low-level government desk job, and she bitterly resents anyone who has actually made something of themselves. She came here today looking for a fight." Trent was completely defenseless and tried to walk away. She just snapped like a feral animal. "You need to get her off my property before she seriously hurts someone else." I stood there in the stifling heat, listening to the people who raised me completely fabricate a reality designed to destroy my life. They were entirely willing to see me thrown into a prison cell. They were doing it all simply to protect the fragile ego of a wealthy white man who bought them luxury handbags and paid their country club dues. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were deliberately painting me as the angry, aggressive, unhinged threat, while positioning Trent as the innocent, successful victim who needed saving. They handed the police a narrative that fit every single dangerous social stereotype, practically begging the armed officers to use force against me. But the ultimate betrayal came from my younger sister. Jasmine pushed her way to the front of the group, her face streaked with tears that she had miraculously forced out for her audience. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Layla, who was crying silently and clinging desperately to my legs. "Officer, you need to call Child Protective Services right now," Jasmine demanded, her voice shrill and urgent. "Look at that poor little girl. Camille is entirely unstable. She has some kind of undiagnosed military post-traumatic stress disorder from whatever failed deployment she was sent on. She is violent, she is erratic, and she is a complete danger to that child. Layla is not safe with her. You need to take my niece away from her immediately before she does something worse to her own flesh and blood." The mention of Child Protective Services sent a visceral jolt of fury through my system. Threatening my freedom was one thing, but threatening to rip my child from my arms and throw her into the foster care system was an entirely different level of warfare. My family was perfectly willing to traumatize a 7-year-old girl just to score points for their rich son-in-law. They weaponized my military service, twisting my quiet dedication to my country into a fake mental illness to justify taking my daughter. While a normal civilian might have panicked, screamed, or begged for mercy against the overwhelming weight of their own family, telling false accusations, my training kicked in with absolute clarity. I did not raise my voice to argue. I did not waste my breath pleading with people who had already decided to destroy me. I simply observed. I watched the officers' tactical spacing. I noted how the secondary officers moved to flank my position, cutting off any perceived avenue of escape. I recognized the textbook escalation of police force based on the assumption of an erratic, non-compliant suspect. My family had constructed a perfect trap, wrapping their lies in the undeniable authority of their wealth and social standing. They expected me to break. They expected me to react with the very aggression they were accusing me of, which would only justify the officers using physical violence to subdue me in front of my child. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, absorbed their unified testimony. He looked at Trent's expensive tailored clothing. He looked at my parents' sprawling mansion. He looked at Jasmine's designer dress. Then he looked at me. He made his judgment in a matter of seconds. The sheer weight of the family wealth and their coordinated, seamless lies provided all the justification he needed to perceive me as a violent criminal. He did not ask for my side of the story. He did not ask what led up to the altercation. He simply accepted the narrative presented by the property owners. His entire demeanor shifted from investigative to hostile. He nodded to his partner, and both men stepped onto the patio, closing the distance between us. Their postures were rigid, their hands hovering dangerously close to their equipment. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I could hear my mother's quiet sigh of relief behind them. I could see Trent's arrogant smirk returning hidden behind his fake grimace of pain. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully disposed of the family embarrassment. "Ma'am," the lead officer commanded, his voice echoing loudly and aggressively across the stone pavers. He reached down to his duty belt and firmly unclipped his heavy metal handcuffs. The sharp metallic click sent a wave of pure terror through Layla's small body, and she buried her face into my thighs. The officer pointed a stern, uncompromising finger directly at my chest. "I need you to turn around right now and place both of your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for aggravated assault. Do not make any sudden movements. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Turn around now." I did not turn around. I did not raise my hands in surrender, nor did I make any sudden or erratic movements that would justify his escalating aggression. I stood my ground with the absolute stillness of a soldier who had faced down threats far more dangerous than a suburban police officer operating on false information. I kept my hands perfectly visible at my sides, my posture completely relaxed, but deeply anchored to the stone patio. "Officer," I said, my voice dropping to a calm and authoritative timbre that forced him to stop and listen. "I am completely compliant, and I understand you are responding to a highly volatile call. But before you place those metal cuffs on my wrists, federal protocol dictates that you verify my identification." The lead officer hesitated. The absolute lack of fear in my voice contradicted every single thing my family had just told him. He was expecting a hysterical, violent, unhinged woman. Instead, he was facing an immovable wall of discipline. He frowned deeply, his hand still resting heavily on his handcuffs. Slowly, he commanded, "Reach for it very slowly, using only my thumb and index finger." I reached into the back pocket of my dark jeans and pulled out a sleek, rigid identification card. I extended my arm and handed it to him. He snatched it from my fingers, clearly expecting to see a standard Georgia state driver's license. He glanced down at the plastic card, ready to dismiss it entirely. But as his eyes focused on the text, his entire demeanor fractured. I saw the deeply embossed Department of Defense seal. He saw the complex holographic security markers that could never be fabricated. He read my title, Major. He saw my operational status, Active Duty Special Operations Command. And he saw the bold red lettering indicating a top-secret, sensitive, compartmented information clearance. The heavy, oppressive silence of the patio was broken only by the sound of the officer swallowing hard. He looked up from the military identification card and stared at me. The hostile, aggressive posture melted from his broad shoulders instantly. He respectfully lowered his hands completely away from his duty belt. "Major," he said, his voice stripped entirely of its previous aggression and replaced with undeniable professional respect. "My sincere apologies. I did not realize who I was speaking to." My family stood frozen in complete confusion. Trent, still clutching his supposedly broken wrist against his chest, stepped forward with a look of frantic disbelief. "What are you doing?" Trent demanded, his face red with indignation. "Why is she not in handcuffs? I told you she attacked me. I want her arrested right now. You cannot just let her go because she handed you some fake badge." Jasmine chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate as she pointed at me. "It is probably a fake ID she bought online. She is just a low-level clerk. She is a nobody. Arrest her." I did not even look at my sister. I kept my eyes locked securely on the lead officer. "Officer, my family has just provided you with a coordinated and fabricated narrative designed to have me unlawfully arrested. Before you take their verbal statements as absolute fact, I highly recommend you review the physical evidence." Without waiting for his permission, I reached into my front pocket and pulled out my matte black military-grade encrypted smartphone. As a tactical cyber intelligence commander, dealing with complex and hostile enemy networks was my daily reality. Bypassing the basic commercially bought smart home security system of my parents' estate was absolute child's play. My fingers moved across the touchscreen in a rapid and practiced blur. In a matter of seconds, I sliced cleanly through the rudimentary civilian firewall surrounding their network. I seamlessly connected my device directly to the massive outdoor smart television mounted above the stone fireplace on the patio. The large black screen suddenly flickered to life. I accessed their security server, pulled the raw, unedited feed from the high-definition surveillance camera, positioned perfectly above our heads, and hit play. The television illuminated the patio, broadcasting the crystal-clear footage for the police officers and my entire family to see. The video showed everything in undeniable detail. It showed Trent aggressively hurling the heavy training gloves directly at my chest. It showed him stepping menacingly into my personal space, towering over me, while my young daughter cowered in fear behind my legs. It showed my hands resting completely non-threateningly at my sides, proving I was entirely defensive. Then the climax of the footage played. It showed Trent planting his foot and lunging forward with explosive, violent intent, aiming to tackle a mother into the solid stone floor. And it showed my flawless, measured, legally justified self-defense. The officers watched as I simply stepped off the center line, redirected his massive weight, and pinned him to the ground using the absolute minimum force required to neutralize a physical threat to myself and my minor child. There was no brutal assault. There was no unhinged violence. There was only a highly trained operative protecting her daughter from a dangerous aggressor. The video looped, playing the humiliating takedown a second time in total silence. The lead officer turned away from the television screen and looked directly at Trent. The officer's eyes were cold and hard. He handed my military identification card back to me with a crisp, respectful nod. Then he stepped toward my brother-in-law. "Listen to me very carefully," the officer said to Trent, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Filing a false police report is a severe criminal offense. Lying to a sworn officer in an attempt to have an innocent woman wrongfully imprisoned is a felony. The only person on this patio who committed an assault today was you. You are incredibly lucky that the major here is not pressing charges against you for attacking her and endangering a child." Trent opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He was sweating profusely, his arrogant smirk completely eradicated by the undeniable proof of his own cowardice. The officer turned to my parents and my sister, sweeping his gaze over their expensive designer clothes with profound and visible disgust. "If we ever get called out to this address again for another fabricated emergency, someone is leaving in handcuffs, and it will not be her," the officer warned them. He signaled to his partner, and the two men turned their backs on my wealthy, influential family. They packed up their gear, walked briskly down the driveway, and climbed into their cruisers. The heavy engines roared to life, and the police vehicles disappeared down the street, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence in their wake. I stood on the patio, holding my phone, my daughter Layla still tucked safely behind my legs. I had completely dismantled their coordinated attack without breaking a sweat. My family had just watched their golden white savior get utterly humiliated by physical evidence, and their malicious attempt to have me thrown in a jail cell had completely backfired. But instead of feeling remorse or relief that their daughter was safe, my father Desmond stepped forward. His fists were clenched tight at his sides. His face had turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple with unadulterated rage. He was not thankful that I avoided a wrongful arrest. He was absolutely furious that I had dared to expose the truth and undermine the wealthy man who funded his luxurious lifestyle. The taillights of the police cruisers had barely faded down the long driveway before the heavy silence on the patio was shattered. My father Desmond took a heavy, aggressive step toward me. His face was distorted with a kind of rage I had never seen directed at anyone else. I was breathing hard, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned pale against his dark skin. "You ungrateful, malicious wretch!" Desmond spat, his voice shaking with absolute fury. "You just humiliated this family. You just humiliated the man who puts food on our table." I looked at him, genuinely hoping to see a single flicker of parental concern. "He just watched his son-in-law attack me and try to have me arrested," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "He lied to the police. He put Layla in danger." My mother Vivica marched forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the stone. "Do not you dare try to play the victim here, Camille," she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Trent was just trying to teach you some discipline. You are the one who escalated things. You brought shame to our doorstep today. You wave that military badge around like you are someone important, but you are nothing. You are a complete embarrassment to everything we have built." The sheer delusion was staggering. They had just watched high-definition video evidence of an unprovoked assault against their own daughter, and their only concern was the bruised ego of the white man who funded their country club lifestyle. Desmond stepped directly in front of me, pointing a finger mere inches from my nose. "I am done with you," he growled, his words laced with decades of built-up resentment. "I am entirely done defending your life choices. I am done pretending you belong in this family. You are a violent, bitter woman who cannot stand to see her sister happy and provided for. As of this moment, you are no longer my daughter. You are dead to us." The words hung in the humid Georgia air. Disowned. Erased from the family tree simply because I refused to let a wealthy bully physically assault me. Layla whimpered softly, pressing her small face against my leg. I reached down and stroked her hair, refusing to let them see even a hint of emotional pain. My military training had taught me how to compartmentalize trauma, shutting away the hurt to focus entirely on the tactical reality of the situation. Trent, who had been quietly dusting off his expensive polo shirt, let out a harsh, vindictive laugh. His wrist was clearly swelling, but his arrogance had fully returned. He realized that physical intimidation had failed, so he pivoted to the one weapon he believed was absolute: money. "You think you are so smart with your little secret agent badge?" Trent sneered, stepping up beside my parents. "You think terrifying a couple of local beat cops makes you untouchable. You do not understand how the real world works, Camille. In the real world, badges do not mean a thing. Capital is what dictates reality, and you have absolutely no capital." Jasmine crossed her arms, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Tell her, babe," she urged, her voice dripping with venom. "Tell her exactly who she is dealing with." Trent puffed out his chest. "You see, Camille, your parents have expensive taste, but they lack financial discipline. They were drowning in debt, trying to maintain this beautiful estate. They were 6 months behind on the mortgage. The bank was ready to foreclose and throw them out on the street. But I stepped in. I formed a holding company, and I bought the debt. I hold the paper on this entire property." He smiled, a cold, predatory expression that revealed the true depth of his malice. "I own the main house. I own the pool. I own the gardens. And most importantly, I own the guest house you are currently renting. You are standing on my property." The reality of his words settled over the patio. Trent was not just a rich son-in-law. He was their landlord. He literally owned my parents, which perfectly explained their blind, sickening devotion to him. They were terrified of losing their luxury lifestyle, so they willingly sacrificed their eldest daughter to keep the peace. "And because you are a violent liability," Trent continued, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper. "I am officially terminating your lease. You are evicted. I want you and your brat off my property immediately." "You cannot legally evict a tenant without a formal 30-day notice," I replied, my voice completely devoid of panic. "The law requires due process." Trent threw his head back and laughed loudly. The law, he mocked. I have a team of elite corporate lawyers on retainer who bill $1,000 an hour. By the time you figure out how to file a motion in housing court, I will have already buried you in injunctions. But let me make this very clear for you. I am not waiting 30 days. I am giving you until midnight tonight. He pointed a rigid finger at my chest. You have exactly until the stroke of midnight to pack whatever garbage you own and get off my property. If you are still here at 12:01, I am not calling the police. I am calling my private security contractors. They will physically remove you, and they will not be as gentle as those cops were. Jasmine leaned against Trent's shoulder, looking at me with pure malicious joy. You better start packing, Camille. Homeless shelters fill up fast on Sunday nights. I kept my face perfectly still, projecting absolute calm for Layla's sake. You are making a massive mistake, Trent, I said evenly. No, you made the mistake when you laid hands on me. Trent snapped back, his face reddening again. And just to ensure you fully understand the consequences of disrespecting me, my lawyers are not just going to handle your eviction. First thing tomorrow morning, they are contacting the Department of Defense. They are going to contact your commanding officers. We are going to file massive civil lawsuits. We are going to bury the military brass in fabricated character assessments, media smear campaigns, and endless litigation. We will tell them you are an unhinged danger to civilians. We will not stop until your security clearance is revoked, your rank is stripped, and you are dishonorably discharged. He leaned in close, his breath hot and smelling of expensive bourbon. By the time the sun comes up tomorrow, Camille, you are going to be homeless, jobless, and completely ruined. You will have absolutely nothing. Now get out of my sight. I looked at the four of them standing united in their cruelty. My mother, who valued country club status over her own flesh and blood. My father, who traded his dignity for a mortgaged mansion. My sister, who enjoyed watching me suffer. And Trent, the arrogant fraud who thought his money made him a god. I did not argue. I did not plead for more time. I simply took Layla's hand, turned my back on them, and walked calmly across the manicured lawn toward the guest house. I had exactly a few hours until midnight. They expected me to spend that time weeping, panicking, and desperately throwing my meager belongings into trash bags. They expected me to run. But as a tactical cyber intelligence commander, I knew that true warfare was not fought with loud threats or frantic movements. It was fought in the shadows with silent precision and devastating information. I was not going to pack. I was going to dismantle Trent's entire empire. The walk across the manicured lawn felt like a tactical retreat. I did not rush. I did not let my shoulders slump. I held my daughter's hand firmly in mine. The oppressive Georgia heat was finally breaking into a cool evening breeze. Behind me, I could hear the faint sound of ice clinking against crystal glass on the patio. They were already celebrating my departure. They were toasting to my ruin. My father and mother genuinely believed they had secured their luxurious future by sacrificing their eldest child. Jasmine was probably already planning how she would redecorate this guest house once I was gone. They truly thought I was beaten. The guest house was a two-bedroom cottage that my mother insisted on decorating in pale beige tones. It was meant to feel like a generous favor, but it had always been a cage. I locked the heavy wooden door behind us. The loud, solid click of the deadbolt separated me from their toxic world. Layla looked up at me. Her brown eyes were still wide with residual fear from the violence on the patio. "Are we moving tonight, Mommy?" she asked softly. Her voice trembled just a little bit. Layla had moved around the country with me for years, adapting to every military base and every new assignment with bravery. She was a resilient child, but she should never have had to face pure hostility from her own grandparents. I knelt down so we were exactly eye to eye. I placed my hands gently on her small shoulders. "No, baby," I said with absolute certainty. "We are not going anywhere. I need you to go put on your favorite pajamas and get into bed. You are going to read a book and go to sleep. Mommy has some work to do." "But Uncle Trent said we have to leave," she whispered, clutching her small stuffed bear tightly against her chest. I smoothed a stray curl from her forehead. "Uncle Trent does not give the orders in this house. I do. Do you trust me?" Layla nodded slowly. Her breathing finally returned to a normal, steady rhythm. She trusted me completely because I had never failed her. I tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and left her bedroom door slightly ajar so the warm hallway light could comfort her in the dark. Once I was entirely alone in the quiet living room, I did not search for cardboard boxes. I did not open a single suitcase. I walked straight to my heavy canvas tactical bag and pulled out my government-issued field terminal. It was a thick, ruggedized laptop meticulously designed to withstand combat environments and secure highly classified data. I set it down on the glass coffee table and powered it on. The biometric scanner flashed green as it verified my fingerprint. The screen illuminated the dark room with a cool, piercing blue glow. My family thought I was a clerk. They thought I filed paperwork and answered phones for some mid-level officer because they could not fathom an African-American woman possessing actual authority without a wealthy man providing it. They had absolutely no concept of the digital warfare I waged on a daily basis. As a tactical cyber intelligence commander, my actual job was to completely dismantle hostile networks. I spent my deployment sitting in heavily fortified command centers, tearing through the digital infrastructure of international terror cells and state-sponsored hackers. I hunted dangerous people who hid behind layers of military-grade encryption. I exposed massive financial syndicates that funded global conflict. Trent thought his civilian corporate lawyers and his expensive commercial firewalls made him a god. To me, his entire digital empire was a fragile paper house waiting for a single match. I cracked my knuckles. It was a deliberate mocking echo of Trent's earlier arrogant gesture on the patio. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I targeted his venture capital firm first. I needed to understand exactly where his money came from. If he had the liquid capital to buy the mortgage debt on my parents' massive estate, there had to be an extensive paper trail. I initiated a series of automated vulnerability scans against his company servers. Within exactly 4 minutes, I found the entry point. It was a lazy, unpatched server protocol tied directly to his executive email account. He spent tens of thousands of dollars on physical security contractors, but completely neglected his basic digital hygiene. I slipped through the back door of his corporate network without triggering a single internal alarm. I established a secure encrypted tunnel and began mapping his entire financial ecosystem. The data unfolded across my screen in cascading lines of text and numeric values. I was looking directly at the beating heart of his operation. I bypassed the dual authentication on his private accounting software. I navigated easily through the digital labyrinth of shell companies and proxy accounts he used to hide his assets. As I dug deeper into the servers, the grand illusion of Trent, the wealthy white savior, began to shatter completely. I did not find the robust, expanding investment portfolios he boasted about at every family dinner. I did not find legitimate returns on capital. What I found was a massive, glaring black hole of debt. I opened his primary corporate ledger. My eyes scanned the incoming and outgoing wire transfers. Trent was bleeding money at an astonishing rate. His legitimate investments had tanked over a year ago. To cover his massive losses and maintain his lavish lifestyle, he had been moving funds illegally. He was taking capital directly from new investors and using it to pay off the older ones. He was running a textbook Ponzi scheme. But the deception went much deeper than simple financial fraud. I traced a series of highly suspicious automated monthly transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being quietly funneled into a local business account. I checked the routing numbers and cross-referenced the state corporate registry. The money was being funneled directly into Jasmine's high-end fashion boutique. He was using my sister's supposedly successful business as a front to wash the stolen investor funds. My parents believed Jasmine was a brilliant entrepreneur who had built a luxury brand from scratch. In reality, her entire store was nothing but a domestic money laundering operation designed to clean Trent's dirty cash. Jasmine was either a completely clueless participant or a willing accomplice to a massive federal crime. I pulled his tax records from the last 5 years. I found offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and dozens of shell corporations registered in Delaware. I checked the timestamps on the most recent offshore wire transfers. The margin calls on his bad investments were finally catching up to him. He was millions of dollars in debt to very dangerous corporate creditors. He had desperately needed liquid assets to keep the illusion alive. That was exactly why he targeted my parents. I knew they were financially reckless. He knew they were desperate to maintain their elite country club status. He had convinced them to sign over their massive estate as collateral for a predatory loan, allowing him to leverage their property to cover his own failing margins. He had stolen their entire ancestral home right out from under them, and my parents were too blinded by his perceived wealth to even read the fine print on the documents they signed. The digital clock in the bottom corner of my screen read 11:15 at night. I had exactly 45 minutes until Trent's midnight deadline. 45 minutes until he arrived with his hired muscle to throw me out onto the street. I initiated a mass data extraction protocol. Terabytes of highly sensitive financial records, illegal wire transfers, and fraudulent tax documents began downloading directly onto my secure encrypted drive. I captured every single keystroke, every deleted email, and every hidden offshore account. I was assembling a prosecution package so devastating that federal authorities would not even need to conduct their own investigation. I was handing them a completed puzzle with a neat little bow. The progress bar inched toward 100%. The silence of the guest house was absolute, broken only by the rapid rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. I watched the final heavily encrypted file transfer successfully into my possession. Trent thought he possessed the ultimate power because he held a piece of paper. He thought he could break me with the threat of homelessness and a ruined career. He expected to find me weeping and packing my bags in total despair. I closed the laptop and stood up in the dark, quiet room. I held the absolute destruction of his entire life in the palm of my hand. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I looked out the window toward the main house. The lights were blazing across the property. I could see shadows moving across the large bay windows. They were waiting for midnight. They were waiting for my complete humiliation. And so was I. I turned away from the window and walked back to my field terminal. The screen glowed with the raw, unfiltered truth of Trent's entire existence. I sat down and began to piece together the massive puzzle he had recklessly scattered across the internet. I opened the encrypted drive where I had dumped his internal ledgers. The numbers painted a desperate, pathetic picture. Trent was running a classic high-yield investment fraud. He promised his wealthy clients double-digit returns on phantom tech startups and exclusive real estate developments. For the first 2 years, he paid early investors with money he collected from new investors. It was a standard, unoriginal Ponzi scheme. But then the market shifted. His fake portfolios began to hemorrhage cash. I traced wire transfers routing through the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. I was bleeding out quickly. To keep up the facade of the untouchable venture capitalist, he started skimming heavily from the principal accounts. He stole millions of dollars to fund the imported sports cars, the designer suits, and the lavish country club dinners my parents so deeply admired. My mother and father worshipped his wealth because they thought it validated their own social climbing. They never realized they were bowing down to a common thief. Stealing money is only half the battle, though. You have to wash it to spend it. I opened a subder containing the banking records for Jasmine's luxury fashion boutique in downtown Atlanta. My parents treated that store like it was the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence. They bragged about it to everyone in their social circle. But as I cross-referenced the store's inventory purchases against its reported daily revenue, the math completely shattered the illusion. Jasmine was selling maybe 10 overpriced dresses a week, yet her corporate accounts were showing daily cash deposits of $50,000. Trent was funneling his stolen investor capital directly through her cash registers. He was faking massive retail sales to turn his dirty, embezzled funds into clean, taxable income. My sister's entire business empire was nothing but a criminal front. The most damning files were buried in a heavily guarded folder labeled Asset Management. A few months ago, Trent's largest offshore creditor issued a massive margin call. He needed $8 million in liquid cash immediately, or he was going to face severe consequences from very dangerous people. He did not have the money, so he turned to his biggest fans, my parents. I read through the scanned legal contracts he kept hidden on a private server. Desmond and Vivica had signed over the deed to their ancestral estate, completely believing Trent was simply rolling their massive mortgage into a better interest rate through his corporate firm. They blindly trusted the wealthy white savior to handle their finances. Trent immediately took that deed and tried to leverage it for an emergency bridging loan to satisfy his angry creditors. He formed a shell company to absorb the property debt, intending to liquidate the estate right out from under my parents. He was perfectly willing to render his in-laws homeless to save his own skin. But Trent made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that because I lived quietly in the guest house, I was entirely ignorant of the property's legal standing. A month ago, my cyber intelligence unit flagged a suspicious bulk transfer of property deeds linked to known domestic money laundering networks. My parents' address appeared on that federal watch list. I did not warn them because they never would have believed me. They would have accused me of being jealous of Trent's success. Instead, I took immediate tactical action. I utilized a specialized military-affiliated credit union that securely manages my blind trust. When Trent attempted to transfer the debt to his fraudulent shell company, my financial officers intercepted the sale. We purchased the distressed debt directly from the original bank for pennies on the dollar before Trent's paperwork could even clear the local municipality. Trent thought he held the paper on the estate. He thought his elite corporate lawyers had secured the property. He had absolutely no idea that his transaction was rejected by federal regulators and completely overwritten by my trust. I am the sole legal owner of the entire property. I own the main house, the infinity pool, the manicured gardens, and the guest house. Trent did not own the ground he was standing on. He was just a desperate criminal trespassing on my land. I checked the digital clock on my taskbar. It read 11:45 at night. I had exactly 15 minutes until his arbitrary midnight deadline. I compiled all the evidence. The wire fraud, the money laundering, the forged signatures on the property transfers, the grand larceny. I formatted it into a single clean encrypted dossier. I addressed the data packet directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically routing it to an agent I worked with frequently on domestic terror financing. With one press of the Enter key, the package was queued and ready to send. I was not just going to embarrass my brother-in-law, I was going to completely erase his freedom. 11:55. The guest house was completely silent. I walked down the short hallway and peeked into Layla's room. She was fast asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. She was safe, entirely removed from the chaos that was about to unfold. I closed her door quietly and returned to the living room. I turned off all the lamps, plunging the space into total darkness. I stood in the center of the room, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. I slowed my breathing, centering my focus, preparing my mind for close quarters engagement. 11:59. Outside, the heavy crunch of gravel broke the quiet night. Bright headlights swept aggressively across the front windows of the guest house, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. I heard the loud slam of heavy car doors. Not just one car, several. Heavy boots marched across the stone walkway leading to my front porch. Trent had arrived, and just as I suspected, he was too much of a coward to come alone. He had brought his hired muscle. The midnight deadline was here. The digital clock on my taskbar clicked to exactly midnight. Right on cue, the heavy crunch of gravel broke the quiet night outside the guest house. Bright, aggressive headlights swept across the front windows, slicing through the closed blinds and casting long, distorted shadows against the living room walls. I heard the loud slam of heavy car doors. It was not just one vehicle, it was at least three. Heavy, synchronized boots marched across the stone walkway leading directly to my front porch. Trent had arrived, and just as I suspected, he was far too much of a coward to come alone. The sudden noise and the glaring beams of light were enough to wake Layla. I heard the soft padding of her bare feet on the hardwood floor before I saw her. She emerged from the hallway, clutching her worn, stuffed bear tightly against her chest. Her large brown eyes were wide with confusion and rising fear. "Mommy, who is outside?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly in the dark room. I immediately moved to her side. I kept my posture completely relaxed because I did not want her to absorb any tension. I knelt down and pulled her close, wrapping one arm securely around her small shoulders. "Just some loud bullies, baby," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady and soothing. Remember what we talked about earlier. I am right here and you are completely safe. I need you to hold my hand and just stand behind me. No matter what they say or how loud they get, you stay right by my side, do you understand? Layla nodded slowly. Her small fingers reached out to grip my left hand, squeezing tightly. She was frightened by the chaotic sounds coming from the porch, but her trust in me was absolute. She stepped slightly behind my right leg, using my body as a physical shield. I stood up, grounded my stance in the center of the living room, and turned my full attention back to the heavy wooden front door. The deadbolt rattled violently, then a key slid into the lock. Trent had used the master key from the main house to bypass knocking entirely. The door swung open with aggressive force, hitting the interior wall with a loud, sharp crack. The cool night air rushed into the living room, bringing with it the smell of exhaust fumes and cheap cologne. Trent stood in the doorway, but he did not step inside immediately. He positioned himself safely behind a wall of pure muscle. He had brought 4 massive private security contractors with him. They were dressed in matching black tactical gear, tight polo shirts that stretched over inflated biceps, and heavy cargo pants. They looked exactly like the kind of unlicensed, unregulated bouncers who worked the doors of shady downtown nightclubs. To a civilian, they looked incredibly intimidating. To a highly trained military commander, they looked completely amateur. I scanned them in a fraction of a second. I noted their poor tactical spacing. They were bunched too closely together in the doorway, restricting their own fields of movement. I noted the way their eyes darted around the dark room, lacking the disciplined focus of actual combat veterans. I noticed their weight distribution was leaning too far forward, making them easy targets for a structural sweep. And most importantly, I noted the heavy firearms holstered at their hips. They were not using proper retention holsters. They were armed, and they were entering my home with hostile intent, relying entirely on physical size rather than actual tactical skill. Trent stepped out from behind the tallest contractor. His face was illuminated by the bright glowing screen of his smartphone. He was holding the device up high, pointing the camera directly at me and Layla. He had an arrogant, malicious smirk plastered across his face. He was not just recording this confrontation, he was actively live-streaming it. "Are you watching this?" Vivica Trent yelled into his phone, his voice dripping with triumphant cruelty. "Desmond Jasmine. I hope you have a great view. I told you I would take care of the family trash before midnight. Look at her standing there in the dark. She actually thought she could defy me on my own property." He tilted the phone to capture the 4 massive contractors flanking him, making sure my parents and my sister could see the sheer, overwhelming force he had brought to crush me. He wanted them to admire his power. The deep, profound betrayal of that moment was not lost on me. My family was sitting comfortably in the main house, safely removed from the violence, watching this illegal hostile eviction unfold on their screens like it was reality television. They were actively cheering for my humiliation. They wanted to see me dragged out onto the lawn. They wanted to see Layla cry. They wanted me punished for refusing to bow down to their wealthy white savior. Trent lowered the phone slightly, his eyes locking onto mine with pure, unadulterated hatred. "I gave you a deadline, Camille." He sneered, his voice echoing in the quiet living room. "I told you to pack your garbage and get out. I see you did not listen. I see you thought my warning was just a bluff. That was a really stupid decision." I did not raise my voice. I did not move from my position in the center of the room. I kept Layla securely hidden behind me. "You are trespassing, Trent," I said calmly. "You have illegally entered a private residence without notice, and you have brought armed, unlicensed individuals across my threshold. I highly suggest you turn around and walk away right now." Trent threw his head back and laughed loudly. It was a harsh, grating sound that made Layla flinch against my leg. "Did you hear that, boys?" Trent asked, looking at his hired muscle. "The charity case thinks she can give orders. She thinks she has rights." He turned his phone back toward me, making sure the camera captured my face perfectly. "This is not a private residence, Camille. This is my property. I own the paper on this guest house. You are nothing but a squatter who overstayed her welcome. And since you refused to leave voluntarily, I brought some friends to help you pack." Trent pointed a rigid finger at me, then gestured broadly to the men surrounding him. "I want her out," Trent commanded the contractors. "I do not care if she kicks or screams. I do not care if you have to drag her out by her hair. Grab her, grab the kid, and throw them out on the street. If she tries any of that fake military judo she used on the patio, put her down hard." The four men shifted their weight, their heavy boots scuffing against my hardwood floor. They puffed out their chests, rolling their shoulders to project absolute physical dominance. Trent took a deliberate step backward, retreating to the absolute safety of the porch. He was perfectly content to let his paid thugs commit violent assault on his behalf while he filmed the entire thing for my parents' entertainment. He wanted to keep his own hands clean while watching me get destroyed. The lead contractor stepped fully into my living room. He was a man with a thick neck and a jagged scar running across his jawline. He radiated a toxic false authority. He looked at my simple clothing. He looked at the small child hiding behind my legs. He clearly calculated that this would be an easy, highly paid intimidation job. He did not see a tactical threat. He saw a helpless single mother who was about to be bullied into submission. I took another heavy step forward, closing the physical distance between us. He dropped his right hand down, resting his thick fingers deliberately and aggressively on the grip of his holstered firearm. It was a clear, undeniable threat of lethal force designed to paralyze me with fear. "Listen to the man, lady," the lead contractor growled. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble designed to inspire pure terror in civilians. "The playtime is officially over. You are going to grab your kid, you are going to walk out that door, and you are going to get off this estate right now. If you make me put my hands on you, I promise you are going to leave this house in the back of an ambulance." The heavy silence following his threat hung in the air like thick smoke. I did not blink. I did not shift my weight or show a single ounce of the fear he was so desperately trying to provoke. I looked at the lead contractor, analyzing the aggressive posture he had copied from cheap action movies. His hand was still resting on his firearm. It was a classic intimidation tactic used by men who had never actually been in a real firefight. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg for mercy in front of my daughter. Instead, I reached out and gently guided Layla to sit in the armchair, tucked safely behind my body. "Cover your ears and close your eyes for just 1 minute, baby," I told her softly. She obeyed immediately, pressing her hands over her ears and squeezing her eyes shut. She was safe, insulated from the psychological warfare I was about to unleash. I turned my attention back to the four massive men standing in my living room. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True authority does not require shouting. It requires absolute certainty. "Take your hand off that weapon right now, Tyrell," I commanded. My voice was a flat, dangerous calm that immediately stripped the oxygen from the room. The lead contractor froze. The arrogant smirk vanished from his scarred face in a fraction of a second. He had not given me his name. He had not introduced himself. He was just a hired thug who thought he was completely anonymous in the dark. "You look confused, Tyrell." I continued, taking one slow, deliberate step forward. "Let me clarify the situation for you. Trent hired you through a shell company to execute an illegal nighttime eviction. He probably paid you in cash and told you this would be an easy job, scaring a helpless single mother. He lied to you. My name is Major Camille. I am an active duty commander in the United States Special Operations Command. You just crossed the threshold of my home with an unholstered weapon and explicitly threatened my life. In the eyes of the federal government, that is not trespassing. That is an act of domestic terrorism against a military officer." The three men standing behind Tyrell suddenly shifted uneasily. The synchronized intimidation they had walked in with was rapidly dissolving into panicked uncertainty. They looked at Trent, who was still holding his phone up, recording the encounter. Trent looked equally confused, but he was too arrogant to realize the trap had already sprung. "Do not listen to her," Trent yelled from the porch, his voice cracking slightly with nervous energy. "She is just a low-level clerk making up lies to scare you. Grab her and throw her out. I am paying you $5,000 each for this job. Do it now." None of the contractors moved. They were looking at me, assessing the very real possibility that I was telling the truth. I did not give them time to think. I pressed the tactical advantage using the intelligence I had pulled from Trent's servers just 20 minutes ago. $5,000 is not going to cover your legal fees, Tyrell," I said, locking eyes with the lead contractor. especially not with your prior record. You received a dishonorable discharge from the military 4 years ago for assaulting a superior officer. Your private security license was revoked by the state of Georgia last November after you hospitalized a college student outside a nightclub in Buckhead. You are carrying a concealed firearm as an unlicensed civilian with a violent felony record. If you draw that weapon on me, you are not going to an ambulance. You are going to federal prison for a mandatory minimum of 20 years. Tyrell swallowed hard. The thick muscles in his neck flexed as panic finally set in. He slowly, very carefully moved his hand entirely away from his holstered weapon. He raised his palms toward me in a universally recognized gesture of surrender. I did not stop there. I shifted my gaze to the man standing just over Tyrell's right shoulder, a heavily tattooed man who was already taking a half step backward toward the open door. "And you must be Kevin," I said smoothly. "You have 2 active warrants for your arrest in the state of Florida for severe tax evasion and unpaid child support totaling over $80,000. Trent found you on a desperate underground forum and promised you quick, untraceable cash. He did not tell you that you would be assaulting a federal officer on camera." I pointed directly at the glowing smartphone still clenched in Trent's hand. "He is live streaming this entire felony to a private server," I told the contractors. "He is creating a permanent digital record of your faces, your illegal weapons, and your presence at the scene of an attempted kidnapping and assault. He is not protecting you. He is documenting your crimes to save himself when the police arrive." The 4 men turned their heads simultaneously to look at Trent. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They saw the phone pointed directly at them. They saw the arrogant, wealthy man hiding safely outside the door while they stood inside the trap. The illusion of their easy payday shattered completely. They were street-level thugs, but they were not entirely stupid. They knew exactly what happened to unlicensed muscle when federal authorities got involved. The rich guy always walked away, and the hired help always took the fall. Trent lowered the phone slightly, his eyes darting between his paralyzed security team and my unbothered posture. "What are you idiots doing?" Trent screamed, his face turning a blotchy, unhinged red. "I told you to get her out of the house. I am giving the orders here. Grab her right now, or you are not getting a single dime." I took another step forward, driving the final nail into their psychological coffin. "I have a direct encrypted line to the United States Marshals Service," I said, my voice echoing with chilling precision. "They operate a rapid response task force stationed less than 10 miles from this estate. If any of you are still standing on this property in exactly 60 seconds, I will initiate the call. They will not ask questions. They will breach that door with tactical assault rifles, and they will put you face down on this floor. You have 60 seconds to decide if $5,000 is worth spending the rest of your natural lives in a federal penitentiary. Your time starts now." I did not break eye contact. I did not blink. I projected the absolute unyielding authority of a woman who had commanded soldiers in hostile war zones. The sheer weight of my confidence broke them. Tyrell looked at me, then looked at Trent. He let out a low string of curses under his breath. He did not say a word to me. He just backed away slowly, his hands still raised defensively. He stepped out of the living room, crossed the threshold, and walked straight past Trent on the porch. "Hey," Trent yelled, grabbing Tyrell's thick bicep. "Where do you think you are going? Get back in there and do your job." Tyrell shoved Trent's hand away with violent disgust. "You did not tell us we were hitting a federal officer, man," Tyrell growled. "You said it was a crazy squatter. You can keep your money. I am not catching a federal charge for your rich suburban drama. We are out." The other 3 contractors did not hesitate. They followed Tyrell, immediately pushing past Trent without a second glance. They rushed down the stone walkway, their heavy boots moving with frantic urgency. They piled into their dark SUVs, the engines roaring to life in the quiet night. The tires spun against the gravel driveway as they sped away from the estate, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and my living room. The dust settled. The sound of the fleeing vehicles faded into the distance. The heavy, suffocating tension that had filled the guest house evaporated, leaving behind a crisp, silent clarity. I had dismantled his entire physical threat, using nothing but words, intelligence, and absolute tactical supremacy. I had completely isolated him. Trent stood alone on the porch. The four massive walls of muscle that gave him his artificial courage were gone. He was no longer a powerful commander giving orders to a private army. He was just a pathetic, desperate fraud standing in the dark, clutching a smartphone that was still broadcasting his absolute failure to my parents and sister. He looked at the empty driveway, then turned slowly to look back at me. I was still standing in the center of the living room, completely unharmed, completely unbothered, and completely in control. The humiliation radiating from him was palpable. He had promised his audience a show. He had promised my mother, father, and sister that he would conquer me, break me, and throw me out onto the street. Instead, they had just watched a highly trained combat veteran intellectually destroy four armed men in under 3 minutes while their golden boy cowered on the porch. Trent shoved his phone into his pocket, ending the live stream abruptly. The glowing screen went dark, but the damage was already permanently done. His chest heaved as he breathed in ragged, furious gasps. He stepped over the threshold, entering the guest house alone. His eyes were wild, stripped of their usual calculated corporate smugness. He was operating entirely on blind, bruised ego. "You think you are so smart!" Camille Trent screamed, his voice cracking with unhinged desperation. "You think scaring off some cheap rent-a-cops changes anything. It does not change a single thing. You do not own this space. I do. I hold the paper. I am the legal landlord, and I am the man of this estate. If they will not throw you out into the dirt, then I will gladly do it myself. I am going to drag you out of here by your hair, and then I am throwing that brat right out behind you." He clenched his fists, taking a heavy, aggressive step toward me. He had absolutely no muscle left to hide behind, but his delusion convinced him he still held the ultimate power of ownership. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. I took another heavy step into my living room. His fists were clenched tight at his sides. His chest was puffed out in a desperate, pathetic attempt to project the physical dominance he had just completely lost. He was breathing heavily, a ragged, wet sound that echoed in the quiet space. He expected me to retreat. He expected me to throw up my hands and beg him not to hurt me or my daughter. He wanted to feel like a powerful man again after his paid muscle abandoned him in the driveway. I did not back away. I did not flinch. I simply stood up from my chair. The movement was slow, fluid, and completely devoid of any hesitation. I walked directly toward the dining table, keeping my eyes locked securely onto his. My steady, predatory gaze forced his forward momentum to stall completely. He stopped dead in his tracks just 3 feet inside the doorway, suddenly unsure of his own authority. He was completely out of his depth, stepping into a combat zone he did not understand. I reached into my heavy canvas tactical bag resting on the floor. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder stuffed with freshly printed documents. I lifted it high and dropped it flat onto the center of the wooden dining table. The sharp slap of the heavy paper against the hard surface cracked like a gunshot in the silent room. "You think you hold the paper on this estate, Trent?" I asked, my voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You think your elite corporate lawyers secured this property for you? You think you are the legal landlord of this guest house?" Trent sneered, trying to recover his momentum. He shifted his weight from side to side, pointing a trembling finger at the folder. "I do not think it, Camille. I know it. I bought the debt your financially illiterate parents racked up. I own every single square foot of this property. Now pick up your kid and get out before I physically throw you into the driveway." I rested my fingertips lightly on the top of the manila folder. I did not break eye contact. "You are an incredibly arrogant man, Trent," I said smoothly. "But your arrogance has made you dangerously sloppy. You operate in a civilian corporate world, where you think a sharp suit and a loud voice make you untouchable. You have absolutely no idea what kind of surveillance you triggered when you tried to steal this estate." Trent frowned. His bravado flickered for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice pitching slightly higher. I opened the thick folder. I pulled out a stack of legally certified property deeds and spread them methodically across the table. I wanted him to see the official state seals and the federal notary stamps shining under the dim living room light. "A month ago," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly measured, "you realized your offshore creditors were preparing to call in a massive margin loan. You were bleeding cash and you needed millions of dollars in liquid assets immediately to avoid facing severe consequences from very dangerous people. So you turned to my parents. You manipulated Desmond and Vivica into signing over the deed to their ancestral home. You convinced them you were simply refinancing their massive mortgage to save them from foreclosure. You took their signatures, created a fraudulent shell company, and attempted to leverage this entire estate for a massive emergency bridging loan. Trent swallowed hard. The thick veins in his neck pulsed visibly. He glanced nervously at the open door behind him, as if wondering who else was listening. "How do you know about that?" he asked, his voice losing its aggressive edge entirely. "Because you are a common thief operating on a monitored network," I replied. "My tactical cyber intelligence unit flagged your shell company the moment you attempted the bulk transfer. Your financial network is heavily tied to known domestic money laundering operations." My parents' address triggered a federal security alert on a highly classified database. I slid the first certified document across the table until it rested just inches from his hands. "You assumed I was just a low-ranking clerk, living quietly in the guest house," I continued. "You assumed I was completely ignorant of the property's legal standing. But while you were busy bragging at country club dinners and belittling my military service, I took immediate tactical action. I utilized a specialized military-affiliated credit union. It is a highly secure financial institution that legally manages my blind trust." Trent stared down at the document. His eyes frantically scanned the dense legal text, desperately searching for a loophole. He was reading the exact coordinates of his own failure. "When you attempted to transfer the debt to your fraudulent shell company, I explained my financial officers completely intercepted the sale. We purchased the distressed debt directly from the original bank for pennies on the dollar. We executed the purchase before your falsified paperwork could even clear the local municipality. Your transaction was rejected by federal regulators and completely overwritten by my blind trust. I took a deliberate step around the table, closing the physical distance between us." Trent instinctively took a half step backward, his shoulders curling inward as the weight of my words pressed down on him. "You do not hold the paper on this estate, Trent," I said, my voice cutting through him like a blade. "You do not own the main house. You do not own the infinity pool. You do not own the manicured gardens. And you certainly do not own this guest house. I am the sole legal owner of the entire property. You do not own a single blade of grass on this estate. You are nothing but a desperate criminal currently trespassing on my land." Trent shook his head violently. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute confusion and rising terror. "No," he stammered, his voice weak and trembling in the quiet room. "No, my lawyers filed the paperwork. I saw the transfer receipts. I own this property. You are lying. You are just trying to stall." I allowed a cold, hard smile to finally touch my lips. "Your lawyers filed fraudulent paperwork for a transaction that had already been federally blocked," I corrected him. "But I will admit, I did let you believe you had successfully stolen the property. I intentionally allowed your shell company to receive fake confirmation receipts from a dummy server I set up." "Why would you do that?" Trent whispered. He was completely stripped of his arrogant white savior persona. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely defeated. The wealthy bully who had threatened to snap my arm on the patio was entirely gone. "Because I needed you to complete the fraudulent transfer," I stated plainly. "I needed you to commit federal wire fraud so I could securely trace your laundered funds back to their original source. I needed to see exactly how you were washing the money you embezzled from your venture capital investors." I reached back into the thick folder. This was the moment I had been waiting for since he threw those heavy training gloves at my chest. This was the ultimate tactical strike. I pulled out a thick stack of printed financial ledgers. They were highly classified documents detailing every single offshore account he had desperately tried to hide. I had pulled them directly from his personal servers just minutes ago. I dropped the heavy stack of ledgers onto the table. I spread them out so the rows of highlighted numbers were completely visible. "These are your offshore routing accounts in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus," I said, tapping the paper with my index finger. "These are the exact dates and times you skimmed principal capital directly from your new investors to pay off the massive losses in your failing tech portfolios." And these are the automated monthly transfers proving you have been funneling hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars directly through my sister Jasmine's high-end fashion boutique. You turned her retail store into a domestic money laundering operation. You implicated your own wife in a massive federal crime just to cover your tracks. I slid the printed ledgers across the smooth wood of the dining table. The thick stack of papers stopped right against his waist. "Look at them, Trent," I commanded. "Look at the exact dollar amounts." Trent looked down. His entire body was shaking now. He saw the specific account numbers he thought were buried behind impenetrable layers of expensive corporate encryption. He saw the massive $8 million margin call he owed to his creditors. He saw his entire criminal enterprise laid out in stark, undeniable black and white ink. The air completely left his lungs. He stumbled backward, his shoulders slumping as the devastating reality crashed down on him. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His eyes darted rapidly across the pages, registering the sheer magnitude of the evidence I had compiled against him. He realized in that exact moment that he had not just lost the estate. He had lost absolutely everything. His wealth was a mirage. His freedom was gone. I had completely and utterly destroyed him without ever throwing a punch. Trent stared at the stack of financial ledgers spread across my dining table as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. The arrogant, wealthy white savior who had swaggered onto my porch just minutes ago completely vanished. In his place stood a terrified hollow shell of a man. His expensive designer polo shirt was suddenly stained with dark patches of nervous sweat. His broad shoulders caved inward, and his chest heaved with shallow, ragged breaths. He reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers hovering over the pages, documenting his massive offshore accounts and his blatant embezzlement. He did not need to ask how I obtained them. The cold, hard reality was staring him right in the face. He realized that the impenetrable digital fortress he thought protected his criminal empire had been effortlessly torn down by the very woman he had spent the entire day humiliating. Before Trent could even attempt to formulate a pathetic excuse, the sound of rapid, frantic footsteps echoed across the stone walkway outside. The heavy wooden front door swung fully back on its hinges. My father Desmond stormed into the guest house. His face was twisted with indignation and confusion. Right behind him was my mother Vivica, clutching her silk shawl, and my sister Jasmine, who was aggressively tapping the screen of her smartphone. They had been watching Trent's live stream from the absolute safety of the main house, waiting for the climax of my eviction. When the broadcast abruptly cut out and the private security contractors fled down the driveway in a panic, their morbid entertainment had turned into panicked curiosity. They came rushing down to the guest house, expecting to find me in tears, begging for a second chance. They expected to see Trent standing victorious over my packed bags. "What in the world is going on down here?" Camille Desmond roared, stepping protectively next to his son-in-law. He did not even look at me first. He looked around the room for the security team. "I saw those men speed off the property. Trent paid good money to have you properly removed from this estate. Why are you still standing in my guest house?" Jasmine shoved her phone into her pocket and rushed to her husband's side. She grabbed his arm, completely oblivious to his frozen, panicked state. "Trent, babe, what happened to the camera?" She whined, her voice high-pitched and incredibly grating. "The feed just died right when those guys walked in. Did she break your phone? I wanted everyone to see her get dragged out." Vivica stood near the doorway, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You always have to ruin everything, Camille," she scolded. "We finally have a peaceful night, and you have to cause a scene that chases off professional security. You are an absolute menace. Apologize to Trent and get your things out of here before your father calls the actual police." I did not raise my voice to match their chaotic energy. I stood tall, my posture radiating the absolute authority of my military rank. I pointed a steady, calm finger at the thick stack of documents resting on the table between us. "I am not going anywhere," I stated simply. "But the three of you need to step forward and take a very close look at the paperwork your perfect son-in-law just reviewed." Desmond frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. He looked at Trent, expecting the younger man to intervene and put me in my place. But Trent was completely mute. He was staring at the floor, his jaw working silently, as the sheer magnitude of his impending prison sentence crushed his vocal cords. "What is this garbage?" Camille Jasmine snapped, stepping up to the table. She snatched the top page of the ledger, ready to dramatically tear it in half, but her eyes caught the bold lettering at the top of the page. She saw the name of her own high-end fashion boutique printed next to a series of massive offshore wire transfers. She paused, her perfectly manicured fingernails hovering over the paper. "Those are internal financial ledgers from Trent's venture capital firm," I explained smoothly. "They detail exactly how he has been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from his investors to cover his massive losses in the market. More importantly, Jasmine, they show how he has been using your retail store to wash the stolen cash. He has been funneling hundreds of thousands of dirty dollars through your business accounts every single month to turn it into clean taxable income. You are currently the primary front for a massive federal money laundering operation." Jasmine dropped the paper as if it had physically burned her. She stumbled backward, bumping into Desmond. What she gasped, her eyes darting wildly toward her husband. "Trent, tell her she is lying. Tell her she made this up." Trent did not look up. He could not meet his wife's eyes. His silence was the loudest confession possible. My father, Desmond, pushed past Jasmine and grabbed the documents himself. His hands were shaking as he sifted through the certified property deeds I had printed. "What is this nonsense about the estate?" Desmond demanded, his voice losing its booming authority. "Trent bought the debt. He saved the house from foreclosure. He showed us the paperwork." "He showed you a fraudulent shell company," Desmond, I corrected him sharply, refusing to call him father. "He needed $8 million in liquid cash immediately to pay off incredibly dangerous creditors. He manipulated you and Vivica into signing over the deed to your ancestral home so he could leverage the property for an emergency loan. He was planning to liquidate the estate and leave you completely homeless to save himself." Vivica let out a sharp, strangled gasp. She pressed both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with mounting horror. "No," she whispered. "Trent would never do that to us. He provides for us." "He does not provide anything," I fired back, striking down her delusions with cold, hard facts. "He is a common thief who funded your country club lifestyle with stolen money. But you do not have to worry about him liquidating your house anymore. Because when he attempted the fraudulent transfer, my blind trust intercepted it. I bought the distressed debt directly from your bank. You do not own this estate anymore, Desmond. Trent does not own it either. I am the sole legal owner of this entire property." The revelation hit the room with the force of a tactical explosive. Desmond stared at the federal notary stamps on the deeds. The undeniable truth stared right back at him. The man who had spent his entire life valuing wealth and status above his own flesh and blood suddenly realized he had absolutely nothing left. He had willingly signed his entire life over to a criminal, and his disgraced military daughter was the only reason a bank had not already seized the land. Jasmine grabbed Trent's shirt collar, shaking him violently. "Say something," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Tell them it is not true. Tell them you did not use my store. I am going to go to jail, Trent. They are going to lock me up. Tell them you did not do this." Trent finally looked up. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and completely devoid of sanity. He was pushed entirely into a corner. His hired muscle had abandoned him. His financial empire was exposed. His family was turning on him. He knew that the federal data packet I prepared was likely already in the hands of the authorities. He could probably hear the imaginary sirens echoing in his head. He was a trapped rat, and trapped rats do not surrender peacefully. They lash out. Trent looked at me with a hatred so pure and unadulterated it practically burned the air between us. He realized he could not fight me financially, and he knew he could not fight me physically after what happened on the patio. But he needed leverage. He needed a guarantee that he could walk out of the guest house and get to his car before the federal agents swarmed the property. He needed a hostage. His wild, desperate eyes shifted away from my face. They darted past my shoulder and landed directly on the small armchair tucked securely in the corner of the room. They landed on Layla. My daughter was sitting perfectly still, her hands pressed tightly over her ears, and her eyes squeezed shut exactly as I had instructed her. She was incredibly vulnerable. Trent made his calculation in a fraction of a second. He did not care about the consequences. He did not care about my family watching. He let out a primal, guttural roar of pure, desperate rage. He shoved Jasmine violently to the floor, clearing his path. With explosive, terrifying speed, Trent lunged blindly across the living room, reaching his large, grasping hands directly toward my 7-year-old little girl. The space between Trent and the small armchair where my daughter sat was no more than 15 feet. In the heavy shadows of the guesthouse living room, he moved with a sudden, clumsy, explosive violence that completely shattered the stillness. He was no longer a calculating venture capitalist trying to maintain a facade of upper-class superiority. I was a cornered, desperate animal operating purely on the frantic adrenaline of a man who knew he was about to lose his freedom for the rest of his natural life. He crashed past the glass coffee table, knocking it aside with his heavy knee. The wood scraped harshly against the floorboards, a loud, jarring noise that signaled the absolute end of any peaceful resolution. Up until this exact fraction of a second, Layla had followed my instructions with perfect discipline. She was sitting in the corner armchair with her small hands pressed tightly over her ears and her eyes squeezed tightly shut. She was trusting me completely to handle the loud bullies in the room. Because her eyes were closed, she did not see the massive, desperate man charging directly toward her. She had absolutely no warning before the violence reached her. Trent did not hesitate. He did not show a single ounce of restraint or hesitation at the sight of a completely defenseless 7-year-old child. He reached out with his large, sweaty hands and clamped his thick fingers brutally around her delicate upper arm. His grip was vicious, entirely disregarding her small frame. With a sharp, violent yank, he pulled my 70-pound daughter completely out of the armchair. Layla let out a sharp gasp of pure shock as she was hoisted into the air. Her stuffed bear fell from her hands, hitting the floor as Trent dragged her roughly against his side. He wrapped his thick forearm tightly around her small waist, lifting her feet partially off the ground so she could not plant her sneakers on the floorboards to resist. He was holding her like a human shield, positioning her small body directly between himself and me. "Stay exactly where you are," Camille Trent screamed, his voice cracking with a wild, unhinged panic. He was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his red, flushed face. "Do not take a single step forward, or I swear I will hurt her. I will snap her arm right now. You just let me walk out that front door and get to my car. You let me drive away right now and she does not get hurt." I was dragging her backward toward the open front door. His eyes were wide and manic, darting between my face and the dark driveway outside where his luxury SUV was still idling. He needed a hostage to guarantee his safe passage off the estate before the federal agents swarmed the perimeter. He actually believed that holding a child would paralyze me with maternal terror. He thought I would drop to my knees and negotiate for her safety while he made his cowardly escape. But what happened next in that living room was not just about Trent's desperate crime. It was about the absolute sickening revelation of my family. My father, Desmond, was standing less than 5 feet away from the doorway. He was a large man who had spent my entire life loudly boasting about his role as the great provider and protector of our family. He constantly preached about masculine authority and traditional values. Yet as a grown man, violently grabbed his own 7-year-old granddaughter and threatened to break her bones. Desmond did absolutely nothing. He froze completely. The illusion of his strong patriarchal authority shattered into a million pieces. He stared at Trent with wide, terrified eyes, entirely paralyzed by his own cowardice. He would not risk his own safety to protect a child. My mother Vivica stood right behind him. She was watching a desperate criminal kidnap her granddaughter, but her feet remained glued to the floor. She pressed her hands over her mouth, letting out small, helpless gasps. For decades, she had criticized my lack of feminine grace and told me I was too aggressive. Now faced with true, unadulterated aggression from the man she worshipped, she was completely immobilized. She cared more about avoiding a messy physical confrontation than she did about Layla's life. She was utterly useless. And Jasmine, my younger sister, was still sitting on the floor where her husband had violently shoved her moments ago. She was staring up at Trent, watching the man she had married reveal his true monstrous nature. The wealthy, charming provider she had based her entire identity around was currently using a little girl as a human shield to escape federal prison. Jasmine did not scream at him to stop. She did not lunge forward to grab her niece. She just sat in the dirt, crying helpless, pathetic tears as her entire fake reality burned to the ground. They were all cowards, every single one of them. They had sold out their strong, protective daughter to appease a weak, abusive man, and now they were forced to stand there and witness the horrifying, violent reality of their transaction. They did not take a single step forward. They did not utter a single word of protest. They completely abandoned Layla to her fate, just as they had always abandoned me. Trent took another heavy step backward, dragging Layla closer to the threshold. The cool night air blew into the house, carrying the scent of the running vehicle exhaust from the driveway. He thought he had a clear path. He looked at my parents standing frozen in the hallway and let out a harsh, desperate laugh. He knew they would not stop him. He knew they were too weak to intervene. "Tell your crazy daughter to back off," Desmond Trent yelled, his grip tightening maliciously on Layla's arm. "Tell her to let me leave, or this is going to get really ugly for the kid." Layla struggled against his heavy arm. She kicked her small feet, her sneakers scraping uselessly against the hardwood floor. She was terrified, confused, and in physical pain from his bruising grip. She looked past Trent's massive arm and found my face in the dark room. Her large brown eyes were filled with absolute terror. "Mommy," Layla screamed. It was a sharp, piercing cry of pure childish terror that echoed loudly against the walls of the guest house and spilled out into the quiet suburban night. That single word hit my ears like a physical shockwave. Up until this exact fraction of a second, I had been operating with absolute civilian restraint. I had used words, legal documents, and psychological intimidation to dismantle my enemies. I had intentionally kept my lethal physical capabilities entirely in check because I did not want to traumatize my daughter with unnecessary violence. I wanted to resolve the conflict cleanly and tactically. But the moment Trent's hand bruised her skin, the moment he decided to use my child as leverage, the rules of engagement completely and permanently changed. He had initiated a hostage situation. He had crossed a line that stripped away any remaining pretense of a domestic family dispute. He was no longer an arrogant brother-in-law or a desperate white-collar criminal. He was an active, immediate, and violent threat to the life of a civilian dependent. I stopped looking at him as a person. I looked at him as a target. I felt the deep, familiar shift in my internal processing. The final lingering threads of familial obligation and civilian hesitation completely dissolved. My heart rate dropped to a steady, cold rhythm. My vision narrowed, locking onto the specific biomechanical vulnerabilities in his stance. I mapped the exact distance between his center of mass and the threshold of the front door. I calculated the precise amount of kinetic force required to separate him from my daughter without causing her collateral injury. I did not say another word. I did not issue another warning. I did not negotiate with a man who was actively threatening to break my child's arm. I dropped all civilian restraint. The safety was officially off. Layla screamed. That single high-pitched sound shattered the last remaining barrier in my mind. The civilian mother who worried about making a scene completely vanished. In her place stood a highly trained tactical operative who had executed high-stakes rescue missions in hostile territories. Time seemed to dilate, slowing down to a manageable crawl as my sensory perception heightened. I registered the exact trajectory of Trent's heavy lunging body. I saw the desperate, wild panic in his eyes. I calculated the precise distance between his thick, reaching hands and my daughter's fragile arm. I was operating on pure chaotic adrenaline. I was operating on 15 years of relentless elite military conditioning. I thought he had the element of surprise. He thought his sudden violent burst of speed would paralyze me just like it had paralyzed my parents and my sister. He was critically mistaken. I did not panic. I did not scream back. I exploded into motion with calculated, terrifying efficiency before Trent could even fully secure his bruising grip on Layla's arm. I closed the distance between us. I did not throw a wild punch or a frantic shove. I executed a targeted tactical strike. Using the rigid edge of my palm, I delivered a sharp, devastating blow directly to the radial nerve cluster on his right forearm. The impact was precise and punishing. The human body cannot simply power through a direct strike to a major nerve center. Trent let out a sudden, sharp gasp of shock as his entire arm went completely numb. His thick fingers instantly lost their grip on my daughter, his hand falling uselessly to his side. I grabbed Layla by the waist, pulling her swiftly and securely behind my back in one fluid motion. "Run to your bedroom and lock the door, baby," I commanded. My voice was a flat, sharp bark that cut through the chaos of the living room. Layla did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She scrambled backward, her small feet hitting the hardwood floor as she rushed down the hallway away from the danger. The heavy, solid click of her bedroom door locking echoed in the space. She was safe. My only objective now was neutralizing the immediate threat standing in my home. Trent stumbled backward, clutching his useless, numb arm against his chest. His face contorted with a mixture of absolute confusion and pure frantic rage. He looked at the open doorway just a few feet behind him. He looked at his luxury vehicle idling in the dark driveway. He realized his human shield was gone, and his escape route was closing rapidly. Desperation overrode whatever tiny shred of logic he had left. Instead of running out the door, he lunged at me. He threw his massive body weight forward, swinging his uninjured left arm in a wild, heavy haymaker aimed directly at my head. It was the sloppy, predictable attack of a man who relied entirely on bullying people smaller than him. I ducked effortlessly beneath his clumsy, swinging fist. I stepped directly into his center of gravity, effectively trapping him in my space. I grabbed his extended left arm, securing my grip around his tricep and his wrist with a vice-like hold. Using his own aggressive forward momentum against him, I pivoted sharply on my lead foot. I drove my elbow upward into his shoulder joint while simultaneously executing a brutal sweeping kick against the back of his knees. Trent was a large, heavy man, but gravity and physics do not care about your bank account or your social status. His legs flew completely out from under him. He went airborne for a split second before crashing violently through the open doorway. His heavy body slammed hard onto the wooden planks of the front porch. The impact knocked the breath out of his lungs in a loud, wet wheeze. But I was not finished. He was still an active, hostile threat. Before he could even attempt to roll over or catch his breath, I moved with him. I grabbed the collar of his expensive designer shirt and dragged his disoriented, thrashing body off the porch steps and straight down onto the hard, rough pavement of the driveway. I needed him completely isolated from the house and fully neutralized on open ground. He hit the asphalt with a heavy, sickening thud that scraped the skin from his cheek. I immediately dropped my knee squarely into the center of his upper back, pinning his spine directly against the cold concrete. I grabbed his left arm, twisting it sharply behind his back into a highly classified non-lethal submission hold. I applied precise, agonizing pressure to his shoulder joint and his elbow simultaneously. I pushed the joint to the absolute mathematical brink of dislocation. It was a perfectly controlled application of extreme physical pain designed to paralyze an enemy combatant without causing permanent structural damage. Trent let out a raw, guttural scream of absolute agony. His face was smashed sideways against the rough pavement. He thrashed his legs wildly against the driveway, kicking up loose gravel, but my knee was anchored to his spine like a solid block of iron. He was completely immobilized. He could not fight. He could not run. He could not even breathe properly under my weight. "Do not move a single muscle, Trent," I ordered. My voice was a cold, lethal whisper that echoed clearly in the quiet night air. "If you twitch, if you try to roll, or if you even think about standing up, I will dislocate this shoulder and separate your rotator cuff from the bone. Do you understand me?" He stopped thrashing instantly. The sheer blinding pain radiating through his arm finally broke through his desperate panic. He was totally broken. The wealthy, arrogant venture capitalist who had strutted onto my property demanding my eviction was now weeping openly into the dirt. Tears streamed down his flushed, dirty face, mixing with the dust and gravel on the driveway. He let out a series of pathetic, ragged sobs. "Please," he whimpered, his voice cracking with humiliation. "Please let me go. I am sorry, please do not break my arm." I kept the pressure perfectly steady, locking him firmly in place. I looked up toward the open doorway of the guest house. My parents, Desmond and Vivica, were standing on the porch, clutching the wooden railing in absolute horror. Jasmine was standing right beside them, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. They had just watched the daughter they dismissed as a low-level clerk systematically and brutally dismantle a massive man in less than 10 seconds. They had watched me execute a level of tactical violence they could not even comprehend. Their pristine country club world was completely shattered. The illusion of Trent's unmatched masculine authority was destroyed. They were staring at me like I was a dangerous stranger who had invaded their home. They finally saw the combat veteran I truly was. They saw the operational commander who did not need their money or their approval to possess absolute power. I did not offer them a single word of explanation. I did not care about their shock or their horror. I simply held Trent pinned to the pavement, my posture unyielding, waiting for the inevitable conclusion to the digital trap I had set earlier that night. The quiet suburban night was suddenly broken. It started as a low, distant hum, a vibration that I could feel through the soles of my tactical boots against the driveway. Then the sound grew rapidly. The distinct roar of multiple heavy-duty engines surged down the main road leading toward the estate. The trees lining the property flashed with alternating bursts of blinding red and blue lights, painting the manicured lawns in harsh emergency colors. The piercing wailing sound of federal sirens flooded the private street, echoing loudly against the massive stone walls of the main house. The cavalry had arrived. The blinding strobe of red and blue emergency lights washed over the manicured landscaping of my parents' estate. A convoy of 5 heavily armored black sport utility vehicles tore down the private driveway, completely ignoring the pristine grass as their heavy tires dug deep into the turf. The synchronized roar of their high-performance engines drowned out the pathetic sobbing of the man currently pinned beneath my knee. Dozens of federal agents poured out of the vehicles before they had even fully come to a stop. They moved with the crisp, undeniable precision of a highly trained tactical unit. Weapons were drawn but securely pointed at the ground, their heavy flashlights cutting through the humid night air to secure the perimeter. They established absolute control of the environment in a matter of seconds. The chaotic violence that Trent had brought to my doorstep was instantly neutralized by overwhelming systemic authority. I maintained my submission, hold on Trent, keeping my knee firmly anchored to his spine until the lead agent approached my position. He was a tall, imposing man, wearing a heavy tactical vest with the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation emblazoned across his chest. He holstered his weapon and gave me a crisp, professional nod. Major Camille, the agent, said, his voice carrying the deep respect of a fellow tactical operator. "We received your encrypted data packet. Excellent work securing the hostile target and maintaining the perimeter. We will take full custody of the suspect from here." I released the agonizing pressure on Trent's shoulder and smoothly stepped back. I smoothed the front of my shirt, my breathing perfectly steady. 2 heavily armored agents immediately stepped forward, grabbing Trent by his expensive designer shirt and hauling him roughly to his feet. Trent let out a sharp cry of pain, his legs wobbling weakly beneath him. The expensive clothes that my parents worshipped were now covered in driveway dirt and his own nervous sweat. He looked wildly at the flashing emergency lights, his eyes darting around the swarm of federal agents in absolute terror. He was no longer a wealthy, arrogant venture capitalist. He was a captured, desperate fugitive. "You are making a massive mistake," Trent stammered, his voice cracking with sheer panic as an agent forcefully turned him around. "Do you know who I am? I have the best corporate lawyers in Atlanta. I own this property. You cannot do this to me. I will sue every single one of you." The lead agent did not even blink at the arrogant display of white privilege. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt and forcefully secured Trent's wrists behind his back. The sharp metallic click echoed in the cool night air, finalizing the absolute destruction of Trent's entire fake empire. Trent, the agent stated in a loud, commanding voice that carried all the way to the porch where my family stood frozen. "You are under arrest by the authority of the federal government. You are being officially charged with multiple counts of grand larceny, massive systemic wire fraud, and international money laundering. And based on what we just witnessed on the dispatched high-definition surveillance feed, we are adding a severe federal charge of attempted kidnapping of a minor." Trent's knees buckled completely at the mention of the kidnapping charge. The last remaining shred of his false bravado evaporated into the night air. He realized in that exact moment that his impulsive, violent decision to grab Layla had just guaranteed he would never see the outside of a federal prison cell again. The agents did not show a single ounce of pity. They dragged his heavy, slumping body toward the back of a waiting armored vehicle, his expensive leather shoes scraping pathetically across the asphalt. With the primary physical threat completely neutralized and secured, the tactical focus of the operation immediately shifted to the accomplices. Two female federal agents detached from the main perimeter group and marched with deliberate, focused purpose directly toward the wooden steps of the guest house porch. My father, Desmond, and my mother, Vivica, instinctively shrank back, pressing themselves tightly against the exterior wall of the house. Their elite country club arrogance had completely vanished. They were staring at the flashing red and blue lights and the armed federal agents with pure, unadulterated shock. They had spent my entire life caring only about social status and maintaining a flawless, wealthy public image. Now their pristine estate looked like the scene of a major organized crime bust, and their elite neighbors were undoubtedly watching the entire humiliating spectacle unfold from their bedroom windows. My younger sister Jasmine was still sitting on the wooden porch floor, where her husband had violently shoved her moments ago. Her expensive mascara was smeared darkly down her cheeks. When she saw the two female agents approaching, her delusional entitlement briefly flared back to life. She scrambled frantically to her feet, smoothing down her expensive silk dress, entirely convinced that the authorities were coming to check on her well-being. She still truly believed that her status as a wealthy, crying wife would grant her absolute legal immunity. "Thank God you are here," Jasmine cried out, her voice shrill and trembling with fake victimhood. "You need to tell me where they are taking my husband. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Trent is a highly respected businessman. My sister is the one who attacked him. She is completely out of control. You need to arrest her right now." The lead female agent did not offer a single word of comfort. She did not ask if Jasmine was okay or apologize for the intrusion. She reached into her heavy tactical vest and pulled out a thick, folded legal document stamped with a prominent federal seal. She stepped directly into Jasmine's personal space, effectively backing my sister aggressively against the wooden porch railing. "We are not here to take your statement," the agent said, her voice completely devoid of warmth or sympathy. "I am currently executing a federal search and seizure warrant authorized by the United States District Court. Effective immediately, every single bank account associated with your luxury retail boutique has been permanently frozen." Jasmine physically recoiled as if she had just been slapped hard across the face. Her mouth dropped open, her eyes wide with total incomprehension. "What are you talking about?" she gasped, shaking her head in frantic denial. "You cannot freeze my accounts. I run a legitimate high-end fashion business. I have elite celebrity clients. You are making a huge mistake." "There is absolutely no mistake," the agent replied sharply, stepping even closer and raising the document. "The encrypted data packet we received tonight provided undeniable, comprehensive proof that your boutique is nothing more than a domestic front for your husband's criminal enterprise. He has been funneling hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars through your cash registers every single month to wash his embezzled investor funds. Your entire retail empire is built entirely on fraudulent money laundering." The color drained completely from Jasmine's face, leaving her looking sick and hollow. The luxurious, wealthy lifestyle she had rubbed in my face for years was instantly obliterated. She realized in that crushing moment that the designer clothes, the expensive sports cars, and the elite social status she flaunted were all purchased with dirty, stolen money. She was not a brilliant, independent entrepreneur. She was a key component in a massive federal crime, and the government had all the receipts. "You are officially listed as a primary person of interest in an ongoing federal financial investigation," the agent continued, thrusting the thick warrant directly into Jasmine's trembling hands. "Your business assets, your personal accounts, and any physical inventory currently located at your retail store are now under the active jurisdiction of the federal government. You are explicitly forbidden from attempting to move, hide, or access any capital. If you try to wire a single dollar to an offshore account tonight, you will be joining your husband in a federal holding cell." Jasmine dropped the heavy document onto the porch floor. Her hands shook violently. She turned wildly toward my parents, her face twisted in pure, desperate panic. "Mom, Dad, do something," she screamed, her voice cracking with absolute terror. "They are taking my business. They are taking all my money. Call our lawyers. Tell them they cannot do this to us." Desmond and Vivica simply stood there in the shadows, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of federal law enforcement. The wealth and authority they worshipped had just been exposed as a massive criminal fraud. They could not save their golden child. They could not bully or bribe their way out of a federal warrant. They were entirely powerless, stripped of their arrogance, forced to stand there in the humid night air and watch their carefully constructed elite reality burn entirely to the ground. The flashing emergency lights cast harsh alternating colors across the pristine lawn of the estate. The federal agents moved with relentless efficiency. Two officers approached the main house with thick rolls of bright yellow evidence tape. They began securing the heavy custom oak doors, sealing the property as an active crime scene. The reality of the situation crashed down on my parents with the physical weight of a falling building. Desmond and Vivica stood completely paralyzed on the cobblestone driveway. Their eyes darted wildly from the federal seals being slapped onto their front door to the taillights of the armored vehicle carrying their wealthy son-in-law away to federal prison. The elite country club social standing they had spent their entire lives cultivating was completely obliterated in a matter of minutes. Jasmine was shivering in the humid night air. The warrant she had dropped on the porch floor fluttered slightly in the breeze. She turned to Desmond, her voice high and trembling with raw panic. "Dad, you have to do something," Jasmine cried out, grabbing his arm frantically. "You have to call the bank. Call your country club lawyers. They just froze all my boutique accounts. I do not have a single dollar to my name. I cannot even afford a defense attorney. You have to help me. You have to use the estate money to bail Trent out so he can fix this." Desmond looked at his youngest daughter as if she were speaking a foreign language. His broad shoulders sagged under his expensive silk shirt. He slowly raised his trembling hands and rubbed his face, wiping away the last remaining traces of his arrogant, patriarchal authority. He could not call the bank. He could not hire expensive lawyers. Because earlier that evening I had laid out the exact details of his financial ruin. The devastating truth that he had been trying to suppress was now clawing its way to the surface. "I do not have any money," Desmond whispered. His voice was a hollow, raspy shell of its former booming self. "Trent came to us last month. He told us he needed to restructure our mortgage to save us from foreclosure. He told us to sign the deed over to his holding company so he could manage the debt. We signed everything over to him. We gave him the entire estate." Vivica let out a sharp, agonizing wail. She clutched her designer pearls, her pristine image fracturing entirely. "We have nothing," she sobbed, looking frantically at the massive house that no longer belonged to them. "He stole our home. He stole our legacy to cover his criminal debts. We are completely destitute." Desmond shook his head, his eyes slowly turning toward the guest house porch where I stood. "It is worse than that, Vivica," he said, his voice completely devoid of hope. "Trent did not just steal it, he lost it. He tried to transfer the deed to a shell company, but the transaction was blocked. Camille bought the distressed debt through her military trust. She owns the land we are standing on. We do not own a single brick of this estate." The full, terrifying picture finally crystallized in their minds. They had willingly handed their entire ancestral home over to a common thief who funded their lavish lifestyle with stolen money. They had been entirely complicit in elevating a criminal while aggressively tearing down their own flesh and blood. Now they were facing the absolute destruction of their lives. Their bank accounts were tied to a massive federal investigation. Their social circle would instantly banish them the moment the morning news aired the details of the raid. They were officially homeless, penniless, and standing on property entirely owned by the daughter they had just disowned and tried to illegally evict. The sheer desperation of their circumstances triggered a profound and immediate psychological shift. The arrogant contempt they had directed at me all evening completely evaporated. The same people who had stood by and watched a grown man violently grab my 7-year-old daughter suddenly realized I was the only person on Earth holding a life raft. I possessed top-secret federal clearance. I commanded an elite intelligence unit, and I held the sole legal deed to a multi-million-dollar property. Vivica was the first to pivot. She abandoned her pride entirely. She rushed across the manicured lawn toward the guest house, her expensive heels sinking into the soft dirt. She practically crawled up the wooden steps of the porch, tears streaming heavily down her face. She reached out with both hands, desperate to grab my arm, but she stopped just short of touching me when she saw the cold, unyielding expression on my face. "Camille, please," Vivica begged. Her voice was drenched in performative sorrow and frantic manipulation. "You have to help us. You have to call these agents off. You are a high-ranking officer. You have the power to stop this. Tell them your sister had no idea what Trent was doing. Tell them we are innocent. You own the estate now. You can let us stay in the main house. We can figure this out together." Jasmine ran up the steps right behind her mother. The sister who had laughed and demanded I be thrown out onto the street just 20 minutes ago was now sobbing uncontrollably. She dropped to her knees on the wooden porch boards. "Camille, I am so sorry," Jasmine wailed, clutching the fabric of her ruined silk dress. "I was stupid. I was blind. Trent lied to all of us. I did not know he was washing money through my boutique. You have to use your military lawyers to protect me. I do not want to go to federal prison. I am your little sister. You have to save me." Desmond walked slowly up the pathway. He could not look me directly in the eye. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at his expensive leather shoes. The man who had proudly declared me dead to the family was now swallowing every ounce of his massive ego. "We made a terrible mistake," Camille Desmond said, his voice trembling with raw, desperate panic. "We were blinded by the money. We let him disrespect you, and we let him disrespect Layla. I will never forgive myself for standing by while he grabbed my granddaughter. But you cannot let them destroy us. You cannot throw us out on the street. We have nowhere else to go. We have no money. The federal government is going to seize everything we have left." They formed a pathetic, weeping circle at my feet. It was a masterclass in toxic manipulation. They were weaponizing their tears, attempting to trigger a deeply ingrained sense of familial duty that they had actively spent my entire life destroying. They threw out the same tired phrases they had always used to force my compliance. "We are blood," Camille Vivica cried out, pressing her hands against her chest. "We are family. Family protects each other. You cannot abandon your own mother and father in our darkest hour. You are a strong, capable woman. You have the resources to fix this. Please, baby, please do not turn your back on us." I stood on the porch of the home I now legally owned. The cool night breeze swept across the property, carrying the faint scent of the pine trees and the exhaust from the idling federal vehicles at the end of the driveway. I looked down at the three people who shared my DNA. I looked at the mother who had called me an embarrassment. I looked at the father who had disowned me. I looked at the sister who had tried to have me wrongfully arrested and thrown in a jail cell. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not feel any lingering sorrow or heartbreak. The years of desperate longing for their approval. The deep childhood wounds of constantly being second best. The frustrating attempts to prove my worth to people who were determined to misunderstand me. All of it was completely gone. In its place was an absolute profound professional detachment. My military training had taught me how to assess a hostile environment with crystal clear objectivity. I was looking at three individuals who had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were toxic liabilities. They were not crying because they regretted their cruelty. They were not weeping because they suddenly loved and respected me. They were crying strictly because they had lost their wealth, and they wanted to use my resources to shield themselves from the devastating consequences of their own greed. I watched as the federal agents continued to methodically secure the perimeter of the estate. They were bagging physical evidence from the main house and cataloging the expensive vehicles parked in the driveway. The empire of lies my parents had built was being boxed up and shipped to a federal evidence locker. The sheer magnitude of their downfall was staggering, but it was entirely of their own making. They had traded their integrity for the illusion of superiority. They had sold their souls to a man who treated them like disposable assets. Jasmine reached out her trembling fingers, brushing the hem of my dark jeans. "Please, Camille," she whispered, her voice completely broken. "Please just say you will help us. Just tell us we are still a family." I stood perfectly still under the warm glow of the porch light. I took a slow, steady breath, letting the frantic sounds of their begging wash over me without penetrating my psychological armor. The time for negotiations was completely over. The time for compromises and silent suffering had expired the moment Trent laid his hands on my daughter. I adjusted my stance, squaring my shoulders with absolute, unwavering command. I looked down at them with pure clinical detachment, preparing to deliver the only response their betrayal deserved. I stood on the porch of the guest house, bathed in the warm, amber glow of the exterior lights. The cool Georgia night air swept across the manicured lawn, carrying the heavy scent of pine trees and the exhaust from the idling federal vehicles. I looked down at the three people kneeling in the dirt at the bottom of the wooden steps. My mother Vivica was weeping uncontrollably, her expensive silk shawl slipping from her trembling shoulders as she desperately pleaded for mercy. My father Desmond stared blankly at the ground, his broad chest heaving as the crushing reality of his absolute financial and social ruin finally settled over him. My younger sister Jasmine clutched the wooden railing, her face smeared with ruined makeup, begging me to use my military authority to save her from federal prison. They formed a pathetic, desperate circle of manipulation. They expected the dutiful, quiet daughter they had bullied and belittled for 35 years to suddenly step forward and shield them from the catastrophic consequences of their own extraordinary greed. They invoked the concept of blood and family, hoping to trigger a deeply ingrained sense of loyalty that they had spent my entire life actively destroying. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the frantic sounds of their begging wash over me without penetrating my psychological armor. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with the absolute professional detachment of a military commander addressing a neutralized threat. I reminded them that just a few hours ago, on this exact patio, they had stood shoulder to shoulder with a man who threatened to break my arm. I reminded them that they had watched Trent physically grab my 7-year-old daughter and attempt to use her as a human shield to escape federal agents. They had done absolutely nothing to stop him. They had frozen in cowardice, entirely willing to let my child be traumatized or injured just to protect the fragile ego of the wealthy man who funded their country club lifestyle. Now that their ill-gotten assets were being seized by the federal government, they suddenly remembered we shared DNA. I looked directly into Vivica's eyes, watching her desperate search for any sign of weakness or forgiveness in my expression. She found absolutely none. I told her that she was right about one thing she said earlier today. I quoted her exact words back to her, stating clearly and firmly that failures absolutely do not belong in this family. I told them that their failure as parents, their failure as protectors, and their catastrophic failure of moral character meant they had completely forfeited any right to call me their daughter. They were not my family. They were simply toxic liabilities that I was permanently severing from my operational environment. Desmond let out a ragged, broken sob, finally understanding that his patriarchal authority was completely gone. Jasmine tried to reach for my hand, but I took a deliberate step backward, removing myself entirely from her grasp. I informed them that because I was now the sole legal owner of the entire estate, I was officially exercising my right to remove hostile trespassers from my land. I told them their formal eviction notices would be served by local authorities at 0800 hours the next morning, but they were absolutely not welcome to spend tonight under my roof. They had exactly 10 minutes to enter the main house under federal supervision and gather whatever basic civilian clothing the agents legally allowed them to take. The lead federal agent stepped forward, giving me a crisp, professional nod before signaling his team to begin clearing the unindicted civilians from the active crime scene. I stood on the porch and watched as my mother, my father, and my sister were systematically marched up the long stone walkway toward the main house. They emerged a few minutes later, carrying nothing but small duffel bags. Their expensive luxury cars were already being impounded. Their massive bank accounts were frozen solid. They walked slowly down the long cobblestone driveway under the heavy escort of armed federal agents. They walked out into the dark suburban street entirely stripped of the wealth, arrogance, and social superiority that had defined their entire existence. They had traded their integrity for an illusion of power, and now they had absolutely nothing left. I closed the heavy wooden door of the guest house, sliding the deadbolt into place, finally securing absolute peace and safety for me and my child. The narrative flashes forward 3 months. The oppressive, humid summer had faded into a crisp, bright autumn. The sprawling Atlanta estate was completely unrecognizable from the toxic monument to superficial wealth it used to be. I had legally repurposed the entire property through my military blind trust, backed by significant federal grants and private defense funding. The massive iron gates no longer guarded a pretentious country club mansion for the corrupt elite. They now protected a secure, fully funded retreat and transitional housing program specifically designed for female combat veterans and their children. We completely renovated the main house. We transformed the grand ballrooms and the extravagant formal dining halls into therapeutic counseling centers, professional job training facilities, and warm communal living spaces. The women who came here were fierce, dedicated warriors who had faced the brutal, harsh realities of overseas deployment. They often struggled to reintegrate into a civilian world that rarely understood their unique sacrifices or the invisible wounds they carried. Here on this estate, they found absolute security. They found top-tier medical and psychological resources, and most importantly, they found a profound brotherhood of women who shared their exact experiences and understood their strength. I walked out onto the wide wrap-around porch of the main house, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The crisp morning breeze brushed against my face, carrying the scent of fallen autumn leaves. I looked out over the sprawling, manicured lawn, taking in the environment that was now alive with genuine, unpretentious joy. 3 veteran mothers were organizing a makeshift soccer game with their children near the infinity pool, which had been converted into a safe community recreation area. Their laughter echoed brightly and freely across the grass. There were no hushed insults spoken in the corners. There were no arrogant displays of wealth designed to make others feel small. There were no underlying threats of physical violence or psychological manipulation. The toxic family dynamics that had poisoned this soil for decades had been entirely eradicated, pulled up by the roots and burned away. Layla ran up the wooden porch steps, her face glowing with a bright, happy smile. She was holding a colorful drawing she had just made with the other children. I set my coffee mug down and pulled her close, wrapping my arms securely around her small shoulders. I rested my chin on the top of her head, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. She was thriving in this new environment, surrounded by strong, capable women who modeled courage and integrity every single day. She no longer had to hide behind my legs in terror. She was completely safe and she knew it. I looked out at the safe haven I had created. I had not only reclaimed my personal power from the people who tried to destroy me, but I had utilized my covert strength and my military resources to build a true, honorable family on the very ground where I was once told I did not belong. I had turned a fortress of abuse and deception into a sanctuary of healing and empowerment. The battles I fought in the shadows had finally brought light to the people who truly deserved it, proving once and for all that true authority is never bought with stolen money or enforced through cruelty. True authority is earned through courage, relentless discipline, and the absolute unwavering refusal to surrender to those who try to break you. Looking back on everything that happened on that estate, the greatest lesson I learned was about the true nature of power and family. For 35 years, I allowed the people who shared my DNA to dictate my worth. I believed that if I just endured their insults, stayed quiet, and accepted my position as the family disappointment, I was somehow keeping the peace. But peace built on your own subjugation is not peace at all. It is simply a prison. I learned that you cannot negotiate with toxic people who view your personal boundaries as a direct threat to their control. Your value is never determined by the inability of broken people to recognize it. True family is not an obligation you are born into simply because of biology. It is a sanctuary built on mutual respect, protection, and unconditional support. When I finally stopped waiting for my parents and sister to defend me, I discovered I already possessed all the tactical strength I needed to defend myself. I did not need their money or their approval to be powerful. I just needed to fully realize my own worth and refuse to let anyone treat me like a disposable asset. You have the absolute right to walk away from anyone who requires you to shrink yourself just to make them feel big. If you have ever found yourself constantly shrinking to fit into a family dynamic that actively hurts you, I want you to know that you are not alone. You have the ultimate power to write a new ending to your story. Have you ever had to establish firm boundaries and walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? How did you find the courage to finally stand up for yourself? Please share your experiences in the comments below. because your story might be the exact inspiration someone else needs to hear today to take their power back. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of absolute resilience and healing. Thank you for listening, and always remember that true strength comes from within.